Ancient Sumer, which originated in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, around 4500 BC, is considered one of the cradles of civilization. They were a people who, it would seem, suddenly appeared with a very complex culture, including cuneiform writing, advanced astronomy, mathematics, the 6 decimal system, irrigation systems, urban planning, and monumental architecture in the form of ziggurats. Their achievements still cause admiration and bewilderment, as they seem to be out of proportion to the level of development that could be expected from that time. It is here in Sumerian texts that we first find references to the Anunnaki, who are described as powerful beings who descended from heaven to earth. This gives rise to one of the most intriguing mysteries. Was the Sumerians' amazing and seemingly advanced knowledge and technology the result of their own genius and millennia of evolution? Or was it really obtained from an external source, from the very Anunnaki who, according to the paleo-contact theory, were extraterrestrial beings, who passed on these lost technologies and knowledge to humanity? The central mystery is the suddenness of the Sumerian civilization and its amazing achievements. Traditional academic science explains this phenomenon by the gradual development of agriculture, the domestication of animals, and an increase in population, which led to the creation of permanent settlements and then cities. The emergence of writing, cuneiform, it is considered as a result of the need to keep records of agricultural products and administrative records. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge was also developed based on practical needs, creating a calendar for agriculture, measuring land plots and construction. All this, according to scientists, was an organic, evolutionary process that stretched over many centuries and millennia. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, based on the translations and interpretations of Zecharia Sitchin, point out several anomalies. First, the Sumerians, in their opinion, did not have a clear transition stage from a primitive society to a complex civilization. They would seem to have appeared already with a fully formed culture, a developed language, writing system, religion, and sophisticated technologies. Where did they get, for example, such detailed astronomical knowledge? Sumerian texts and images on cylindrical seals demonstrate knowledge of all the planets of the solar system, including Uranus and Neptune, which are not visible to the naked eye, and even, according to Sitchin's interpretation, the hypothetical planet Nibiru. How could they know about the existence of these distant planets without telescopes? Academic science explains this fact by saying that Sitchin's images and texts are misinterpreted, and knowledge about distant planets appeared much later thanks to modern telescopes. However, the mystery remains. If the Sumerians were not trained by someone from outside, how did they achieve such a level of knowledge of the heavens that surpassed most subsequent ancient civilizations? Another intriguing mystery is the origin and complexity of Sumerian writing and language. Cuneiform, one of the oldest forms of writing, is an extremely complex system consisting of hundreds of cuneiform characters, each of which could represent a word or two, geometry, or a whole word. Its development from pictographic writing to syllabic and logographic writing was long and complex. Where did this system come from? Proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis argue that this could have been a gift from the Anunnaki, who taught mankind about writing to better organize their work. In addition, Sumerian is an isolated language, meaning that it has no known kinship with any other language on Earth, which, according to some, may indicate its extraterrestrial origin or that it was introduced from outside. Academic linguistics, however, explains this by saying that many ancient languages are isolates, and this is not evidence of extraterrestrial interference. The complexity of language and writing is the result of long cultural development. Nevertheless, the strangeness and antiquity of the Sumerian language, its sudden appearance without obvious predecessors, continues to raise questions. In addition to writing, the Sumerians had an amazing engineering knowledge, especially in the field of irrigation. They created a complex network of canals, dams, and reservoirs that allowed them to control the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and turn dry land into fertile agricultural land. This required not only deep knowledge of hydraulics, but also complex planning, labor organization, and mathematical calculations. Where did they get such advanced engineering skills? Could the Anunnaki, as a more advanced civilization, have passed on this knowledge to them in order to efficiently grow food and extract the resources needed by the gods? Or was it the result of thousands of years of trial and error, empirical observation, and gradual accumulation of experience? The mystery also concerns the motivation and activities of the Anunnaki, according to alternative theories. If the Anunnaki were aliens, then why did they come to Earth? According to Sitchin, their main goal was to mine the gold needed to restore the atmosphere on their home planet Nibiru. To do this, they allegedly created Homo sapiens by genetically modifying primitive hominids, mixing their DNA with that of Earth creatures to produce a reasonable but submissive labor force. This hypothesis, although extremely popular, has no scientific support. Archaeological and genetic evidence does not support sudden genetic intervention or artificial human creation. The evolution of Homo sapiens is a gradual process, confirmed by numerous fossil finds. In addition, the question remains, why, if the Anunnaki were so technologically advanced that they could travel between stars and manipulate genes, did they need gold in such huge quantities for the atmosphere? And why did they leave behind so little direct evidence of their presence if they were so actively interfering in the affairs of humanity? All evidence is indirect and is based on the interpretation of ancient texts, which from the point of view of academic science, contain mythological or symbolic, rather than literal descriptions. Not a single artifact, not a single DNA examination, not a single astronomical observation has confirmed the existence of the planet Nibiru or its inhabitants. However, this theory raises important philosophical questions. Key questions. If contact with a highly developed civilization really took place in ancient times, how would it affect the development of mankind? Could we have been created or directed by someone from outside? The mystery of lost technology and unexplained Sumerian knowledge, in the context of the Anunnaki hypothesis, is not only an academic dispute about the correct interpretation of ancient texts, it is a struggle between traditional science, which seeks rational explanations within the framework of Earth's evolution and development, and alternative theories that seek to fill in the gaps in our knowledge with non-standard explanations. This is a question about the nature of human faith, how ancient religions were formed, and our eternal quest to find others in the cosmos that could explain our own origins and the unprecedented leap in development that occurred in Sumer. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of ancient records about the creation of man and genetic manipulation. One of the most contentious and central issues in the Anunnaki debate is their alleged role in the creation or genetic modification of humans. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, especially Sumerian myths, such as Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, and Atrahasis, the Great Flood epic, contain stories about the creation of mankind by the gods. In these texts, the gods encounter problems with the routine labor of getting food and maintaining their divine existence, and eventually decide to create a human being as a labor force to take on this hard work. Proponents of the paleo-contact theory, particularly Zecharia Sitchin, interpret these ancient narratives not as allegories or myths, but as literal descriptions of genetic experiments conducted by the Anunnaki, alien beings who supposedly mix their own DNA with that of primitive hominids to create Homo sapiens. This raises a deep and still inexplicable mystery. Are these ancient texts just metaphorical accounts of origin, reflecting the religious and cosmological beliefs of the Sumerians? Or do they really contain encrypted information about real genetic manipulations carried out by a highly developed extraterrestrial civilization? And how does this interpretation relate to modern scientific data on human evolution? The central puzzle lies in the literal versus metaphorical interpretation of Sumerian creation texts. In traditional academic Egyptology, Assyriology, and religious studies, as well as in the study of mythology, the creation myths of Mesopotamia are seen as part of a rich religious tradition that sought to explain the origin of the worlds, humanity, and their place in the universe. Gods such as Enki and Ninmah, or Mami, who according to some interpretations took part in the modeling of man out of clay, are mythological figures, and their actions are symbolic acts of creation. The glina from which man is created may symbolize the earthly material of which man is made, and the blood of God, which is said to be added in some versions, may be a metaphor for the life force or divine spark that distinguishes humans from animals. These stories serve to explain the suffering and hard work of man, as well as to justify his service to the gods. However, Zecharia Sitchin in his works, The 12th Planet and others, offers a radically different interpretation. He argues that phrases such as mixing the essence of the gods or sculpting a person should be understood literally as genetic manipulation. According to his theory, the Anunnaki, who came from Nibiru in search of gold, needed labor to extract this metal. Not wanting to do the hard work on their own, they decided to create a primitive worker. Sitchin claimed that they used a drill tube. Symbolically, it could be a designation for DNA or some genetic information of the tree of life. Symbolically, the name of the genome or source of genetic material, and mixed it with blood, DNA, of one of the Anunnaki to create the first hybrid, Homo sapiens. He pointed out that Sumerian texts describe how Enki and Ninmah experimented with creating different types of creatures before obtaining the perfect worker, which Sitchin believes is similar to genetic engineering processes. This begs the question, is it possible that ancient people, without a scientific language, described advanced biotechnological processes using concepts that they could understand, such as clay modeling or blood mixing? Or is it just a modern, retroactive interpretation that puts scientific concepts on top of ancient myths? Another intriguing mystery is the origin of man and the missing link that some believe may have been filled in by the intervention of the Anunnaki. Traditional anthropology and evolutionary biology hold that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa as a result of millions of years of natural selection and gradual evolutionary changes from more primitive hominids. There are numerous archaeological and paleontological finds confirming this evolutionary line. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory point to apparent leaps in human evolution. The sudden emergence of complex language, abstract thinking, art, and technology in Homo sapiens, which in their view cannot be explained solely by natural selection. They suggest that these leaps may have been the result of external genetic interference from the Anunnaki, who accelerated human evolution. In particular, they refer to the myths of the fall, when a person, having tasted the fruit of knowledge, gained wisdom or the ability to reproduce, which could be a metaphor for genetic change or the transfer of knowledge. However, modern genetics does not find any evidence of such genetic interference. The human genome shows a continuous evolutionary history with no evidence of fusion with the DNA of extraterrestrial beings. The development of language and abstract thinking is explained by a complex interaction of biological, social, and cultural factors, rather than by sudden external interference. However, for those looking for more exotic explanations, the genetic manipulation hypothesis remains attractive, as it would seem to offer a simple solution to complex questions about our origins. The riddle also concerns the moral and ethical aspects of human creation in the context of these ancient texts. If the Anunnaki did create or modify humans as a slave race, what ethical considerations motivated them? Was this just a pragmatic solution to meet their needs, or did they also experience some sort of responsibility for their creation? Some texts describe how the Anunnaki later regretted the creation of man, for example, after the Great Flood, or how they decided to destroy humanity, which, according to the proponents of paleocontact, is evidence of their attitude towards people as property. This raises questions about the nature of the deity in ancient religions. Were these gods all good beings, or did they have completely human or non-human weaknesses, selfishness, and ambition? And how did ancient societies perceive their subordination to these gods if they considered themselves their creations or slaves? The mystery of the ancient records of human creation and genetic manipulation is not just a question of how to interpret ancient myths. It is a deep exploration of our own ideas about origins, the role of gods or alien beings in human history, and the limits of our scientific knowledge. This reminds us that myths, no matter how fantastic they may seem, always reflect the deep questions that concern humanity throughout its history. Who are we? Where did we come from? And what is our purpose in the universe? Perhaps the true meaning of these ancient stories lies not in the literal reading, but in their ability to stimulate our imagination and make us search for answers to eternal questions. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of the flood and the ark. Divine retribution or cosmic warning. One of the most universal and enduring themes in mythologies around the world is the story of the Great Flood that wiped out almost all of humanity. From the biblical Noah's Ark to the Greek myth of Deucalion, stories of giant floods sent by the gods as punishment for the sins of humanity are found in a wide variety of cultures, separated by vast geographical distances and millennia. However, the earliest and most detailed versions of this story come from Mesopotamia, especially from Sumerian and Akkadian epics, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Epic of Atrahasis. These texts tell the story of a group of gods who, tired of the noise and depravity of humanity, decide to send a flood to destroy it. But one of the gods, Enki or Ea, in defiance of the other gods' decision, warns a righteous man, Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh, or Atrahasis in his epic, and instructs him to build a colossal ark to save himself, his family, and all kinds of animals. This raises a deep and still inexplicable mystery. Are these universal flood stories just archetypal myths that reflect humanity's collective memory of regional floods and fear of natural disasters? Or are they, in the context of the Anunnaki theory of extraterrestrial beings, memories of a real, possibly planetary catastrophe that could have occurred in the past? Was humanity warned or even saved by technologically advanced extraterrestrial gods? The central puzzle is the universality and striking similarity of the flood narratives. In the Sumerian version, which Zechariah Sitchin considers fundamental to all subsequent stories, the Anunnaki gods decide to destroy humanity. The motive, according to Sitchin's interpretation, was not so much noise or sin as a desire to control or even get rid of the creation that was out of control. The god Enki, who was involved in the creation of man, sympathizes with him and gives Utnapishtim or Atrahasis detailed instructions for building the ark. These instructions often include the exact dimensions, materials, and method of sealing the ship, which, according to proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, look too detailed for a myth and could only be passed on to those with advanced engineering knowledge. For example, describing how the ark is tarred inside and out, using different compartments, and following the blueprint exactly. This leads to the question, why is there such a striking similarity between the Sumerian, Akkadian, and later biblical narratives? Academic scholarship attributes this to cultural diffusion, the spread of myths and stories from one nation to another through trade, conquest, or migration. Mesopotamia, as the cradle of civilization, may have been the source of these early myths, which were then adapted and modified in other cultures. In addition, real-world but local or regional catastrophic floods that occurred in fertile river valleys, such as the Tigris and Euphrates, where floods could be devastating, may have provided the basis for these myths, which have been developed over time. This is an epic worldwide scale in the collective memory. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see something more in this. They believe that the common basis of these stories points to a single, real event that occurred in ancient times. They suggest that the Anunnaki, knowing of an impending cosmic or planetary catastrophe, possibly caused by a change in the orbit of Nibiru or other astronomical phenomenon, decided to save a part of humanity that was useful to them and gave them the necessary ark construction technology for survival. This makes the Anunnaki not just mythological gods, but saviors or mentors who can anticipate and mitigate the consequences of global catastrophes. Another intriguing mystery is the technological details and scale of the ark. The descriptions of the ark in Mesopotamian texts, although different from the biblical Noah's Ark, are also striking in their size and functionality. This is not just a boat, but a huge ship that can accommodate not only people, but also a huge number of animals and supplies. The story of Atrahasis, for example, describes how the god Enki gives Atrahasis the exact dimensions of the ark, and then people follow these instructions and build it. This requires not only a huge organization of labor, but also knowledge about shipbuilding, hydrodynamics, and sealing. If the ancient people built this ark without outside help, then where did they get such advanced engineering skills to build a ship of this scale that could withstand a global flood? This, according to proponents of the paleo-contact theory, is further evidence of Anunnaki intervention. With advanced technology, they could provide blueprints and perhaps even help with construction, or at least pass on the knowledge that would enable humanity to cope with such a task. It also raises the question of the nature of the disaster itself. Was it a cosmic flood caused by an asteroid impact, a powerful solar flare, or another extraterrestrial event? Or was it the result of climate change, melting glaciers, or tectonic activity that caused the tsunami? Some scientists point to the possible existence of an ancient Black Sea flood, when the Bosphorus Strait broke through and caused catastrophic flooding of a freshwater lake that turned into a salt sea, which could serve as a regional basis for myths. However, Sitchin and his followers insist on a cosmic scale associated with Nibiru. The puzzle also concerns the motivation of the Anunnaki in the context of the flood. If they wanted to destroy humanity, why did one of them, Enki, go against the will of the majority and save the people? In traditional myths, this is due to empathy or internal conflict between the gods. Sitchin interprets this Asan internal conflict between factions of the Anunnaki. One group, led by Enlil, wanted to destroy humanity because it became too noisy or numerous and interfered with their plans, while Enki, who was the creator of humanity, felt strongly about it, or saw it as a valuable resource. This makes the Anunnaki less divine and more human or alien in their motivations and disagreements. The mystery of the flood and the ark in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of the historical validity of biblical history. It is an in-depth study of the nature of myths, their function in the society, and their potential connection to real events that may have been distorted and symbolically reinterpreted over millennia. It also reminds us that even the most ancient stories can contain grains of truth that are waiting to be interpreted, and that the search for this truth often leads us to the most unusual and fascinating hypotheses about our past and possible contact with other minds. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the mystery of sky chariots and flying discs, divine chariots or spaceships, ancient Mesopotamian texts and iconography, especially Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian sources, abound with descriptions of creatures that can move through the sky, use celestial chariots and flying objects, and interact with people from high above. Images on cylindrical seals and reliefs sometimes show gods who seem to descend from the heavens on glowing objects or in some kind of capsule. These descriptions, traditionally interpreted as metaphors for divine power, celestial phenomena, or symbolic representations of the cosmic order, are direct and literal proofs of technologically advanced extraterrestrial ships and the movement of extraterrestrial beings for proponents of the paleo-contact theory, in particular for followers of Zecharia Sitchin. This gives rise to one of the most visually appealing and hotly debated mysteries. Were these celestial chariots and flying discs just a figment of the rich mythological imagination of the ancient Sumerians? Their attempt to explain incomprehensible celestial phenomena through the prism of divine intervention? Or do they really contain digitized or literally described evidence of spaceships and spaceships? Extraterrestrial vehicles in which the Anunnaki, as alien visitors, moved around the Earth and between planets? The central puzzle is the interpretation of images and texts describing the celestial movements of the gods. In Sumerian texts, the gods are often described as descending from the heavens, or flying in over the earth. For example, the god Enlil was associated with wind, or storm, which could be interpreted as his ability to move quickly and powerfully through the air. Gods were often depicted with wings, although wings in ancient art may have symbolized speed, divinity, or messenger, rather than the literal ability to fly, or on objects that are difficult to identify. Proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis point out that these descriptions, if read literally, are very similar to modern ideas about spaceships or flying vehicles. For example, Sitchin interpreted images that are generally considered stylized winged suns or symbols of divinity as spaceships or flying vehicles that the Anunnaki rode. The image of the god Ashur, an Assyrian god associated with Enlil, often represented in a winged disc, is interpreted by paleocontact historians as an image of a flying saucer. They also point to texts describing floating objects that they believe were nothing more than space shuttles or even ships used by the Anunnaki to land on Earth. Academic scholarship, however, insists that these images and descriptions are purely symbolic and mythological. Wings, discs, celestial chariots are standard elements of ancient iconography that denoted divine power, speed, connection with the sky, cosmic order, or simply were attributes of certain deities. For example, the winged disc was associated with the sun god and symbolized his power over the sky. Descriptions of the flight of the gods are metaphors for their omnipotence and ability to traverse worlds, not literal accounts of technological movement. Nevertheless, the mystery remains. Why did the ancient peoples, who had no idea about flying machines in our understanding, so often use images that, in the modern view, so strikingly resemble space technology? Was it a coincidence, or was it the result of some observation that they couldn't explain? Another intriguing mystery is the presence of observers or pilots in these flying vehicles. Some ancient images show figures inside or near these flying objects that paleocontact proponents believe are pilots or aliens in their suits or spacesuits. They point out the strange, non-human features of some of the figures, which look too technological or alien for ordinary human images. For example, some figures that are believed to be gods or priests have very large eyes, unusual headdresses, or strange accessories that can be interpreted as elements of space equipment. Academic Egyptology and Assyriology attribute this to artistic style and symbolism. The enlarged eyes could symbolize wisdom or divine vision. Unusual headdresses could be ceremonial decorations or status symbols. And the flying figures are deities performing their heavenly deeds. The absence of any irrefutable archaeological evidence, such as the remains of spaceships, their parts, or other tangible evidence of extraterrestrial technology, makes these interpretations highly speculative and supported only by imagination. However, for proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, visual coincidences are the key. They claim that ancient artists and scribes tried to capture as accurately as possible what they saw, using the means of expression available to them, and that wings and discs were their best. Attempts to describe flying objects that they couldn't classify. The mystery also concerns the influence of these celestial phenomena on ancient cults. If the Anunnaki did indeed use spaceships, how did this affect the formation of their religious beliefs? Could the regular landings and takeoffs of these vehicles, as well as the appearance of gods from heaven, become the basis for the cult of deities who descended to earth and returned to heaven? And why were these gods so often associated with certain celestial bodies? For example, Marduk with Jupiter, Ishtar with Venus, Nana with the moon. Could these associations be the result of the fact that the Anunnaki came from these planets or used them as their bases? The mystery of sky chariots and flying discs in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of what ancient artists depicted. It is a profound exploration of the boundaries of human perception, how ancient peoples interpreted what they saw, and how these interpretations formed the basis of their mythology and religion. This reminds us that our modern view of technology and space is very different from the ancient one, and what is a melting disk for us could be a chariot of God for them. Yet it is this ambiguity that allows the mystery to live on, continuing to stimulate our imagination and make us wonder, what if the ancients saw something that we are only just beginning to understand today? Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of longevity and life extension, a divine gift or advanced medicine? Ancient Mesopotamian texts, especially Sumerian and Akkadian myths, contain startling and sometimes literally confusing descriptions of the incredibly long lifespans of the Anunnaki gods, as well as some early human rulers who are believed to have lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. The king lists of Sumer, for example, lists the names of monarchs who reigned for astronomically long periods, sometimes up to 3,000 to 6,000 years. Even after the flood, When human life expectancy was reduced, it still remains significantly higher than in subsequent epochs. These data, which traditional science explains as symbolic or mythological exaggerations that reflect the idea of a golden age or the divinity of early rulers. For proponents of the theory of paleocontact, in particular for Zecharia Sitchin, are direct evidence that the Anunnaki had advanced medical technologies, methods of prolonging life, or even a fundamentally different biology that allowed them to live much longer than normal people. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are these references to fantastic longevity just mythological hyperbole designed to emphasize the status of gods and ancient heroes? Or do they contain hidden information about advanced biotechnologies, perhaps even genetic engineering that the Anunnaki may have applied to themselves and, to some extent, have been able to control their own lives? To early humans, providing them with an unusually long life, the central puzzle lies in the specific numbers and descriptions of longevity in ancient texts. Sumerian king lists are one of the most mysterious artifacts containing data on the rule of kings who seemingly lived before the flood and ruled for tens of thousands of years. For example, Elulim, the first king of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years, while Enmen-Luana of Bad Tibira reigned for 43,200 years. After the flood, life expectancy was reduced, but still remained impressive. For example, the biblical Methuselah, according to legend, lived 969 years. Traditional academic scholarship explains these figures as mythological exaggerations. The longevity of kings before the flood is seen as a way to emphasize their divine origin or heroic status, as well as an attempt by ancient scribes to symbolically link human history to longer cosmic or divine cycles. The huge numbers may have been the result of a special number system, for example, the hexadecimal number used by the Sumerians and which may have been misinterpreted, or they may have reflected some collective epoch rather than individual life. The transition from millennia to hundreds of years after the flood is also interpreted as a symbolic decline in divine influence on humanity, or as a reflection of a change in geological or climatic conditions. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see this as a literal reference to a different Anunnaki biology and their ability to significantly extend their life. If the Anunnaki were beings from the planet Nibiru, whose period of revolution around the sun, according to Sitchin, was 3,600 Earth years, then 1 year of the Anunnaki was equal to 3,600 Earth years. Thus, a reign of 28,800 years for a Sumerian king could mean only 8 years for an Anunnaki. This allows proponents of the paleocontact theory to scale ancient data to fit their hypotheses, suggesting that it was the Anunnaki who brought the secrets of longevity with them. Another intriguing mystery is the presence of miraculous cures and elixirs in ancient texts. Although there are no direct descriptions of complex medical procedures to prolong the life of the Anunnaki in Sumerian texts, there are references to food of the gods, water of life, or elixirs that gave immortality or eternal youth. For example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero mentions the plant of immortality. These elements, traditionally perceived as allegories of spiritual enlightenment or the pursuit of eternal life, can be interpreted by proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis as technological or biological means. Perhaps the Anunnaki had knowledge of gene therapy, cell regeneration, or other advanced medical technologies that allowed them to maintain their longevity. Or, as some have suggested, they may have used some form of cryosna or stasis for long space travel or waiting periods, which may also have been perceived by the ancient people as immortality or a very long life. This begs the question, if the Anunnaki possessed such technologies, why didn't they apply them en masse to humans? Perhaps because humans were created as a workforce with a limited lifespan, or because these technologies were too valuable and complex to share with primitive humanity, or on the contrary, as is often the case in ancient myths. The gods could be selfish and wish to preserve their advantages without sharing them with mortals. The mystery also concerns the biological basis of longevity in the context of the alien hypothesis. If the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials, could they have had a completely different biology that naturally allowed them to live much longer than terrestrial beings? Their planet Nibiru, if it exists, may have had other conditions of gravity, atmosphere, or radiation background that may have contributed to slowing down aging at the cellular level. Their metabolism may have been much slower, or their cells may have had a much greater ability to regenerate and restore DNA. In this case, their longevity would not be the result of technology, as we understand it, but simply a fundamental feature of their species. However, this remains a matter of pure speculation, as there is no scientific evidence to support the existence of Nibiru or Anunnaki biology. Modern biology and medicine, although they have made significant strides in understanding the mechanisms of aging and the potential for life extension, are still far from achieving the life expectancy attributed to the Anunnaki. The mystery of longevity and life extension in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of how the ancient gods lived. It is a profound exploration of our own aspirations for immortality, to overcome biological limitations, and to find the key to eternal youth. This reminds us that even the most fantastic myths can reflect our deepest desires and hopes, as well as challenge conventional wisdom about the limits of what is possible. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of disappearance and left legacy, oblivion or return. After thousands of years of active interaction with humanity, building cities, transmitting knowledge, and managing destinies, the Anunnaki, according to ancient texts, are gradually disappearing from direct, daily participation in human life. The cults dedicated to them continued. Their names were still spoken in prayers and hymns, but their physical presence on Earth seemed to have dried up. As the Mesopotamian civilizations declined and succeeded each other, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, and then gave way to other empires such as the Persian, Greek, and Roman, the Anunnaki cults gradually faded or transformed, dissolving into new religious systems. Their names and functions may have been assimilated by other deities or forgotten. This gives rise to one of the most intriguing and perhaps emotionally charged mysteries yet. Why did the Anunnaki, if they were real, physical beings, extraterrestrials, eventually leave Earth or stop their open interaction with humanity, and what legacy they left behind, whether it was just myths and legends or no? And did they leave some hidden knowledge, technologies, or tags waiting to be discovered? And is it possible that they will return, which is so often talked about by proponents of the paleocontact theory? The central mystery lies in the motives and circumstances of their departure. Traditional academic science explains the disappearance of gods as a natural process of evolution of religious beliefs. As societies evolved, their ideas about the world and the cosmos, and as political regimes and cultural influences changed, the old gods gradually gave way to new ones, or their cults were transformed. The lack of direct references to the physical and presence of the gods in later texts is explained by the fact that they were always metaphorical entities, not literal ones. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, based on Sitchin's interpretations, suggest several possible reasons for their departure. First, it could be related to the completion of their mission on Earth. If they came here for gold, then after the required amount was mined, or after their home planet Nibiru was too far away from Earth, their presence became unnecessary. Second, the withdrawal could be the result of internal conflicts or a change in strategy. The Anunnaki may have encountered internal disagreements about their interactions with humanity, or they may have decided to change their approach to governing the Earth to a more secretive, invisible control. Third, it could be a consequence of natural disasters or changes in conditions on Earth that made their presence less comfortable or impossible. For example, climate change after the flood, or the emergence of new life forms that could pose a threat to them. Finally, they may have simply reached a point in human development where, in their opinion, humans were sufficiently mature or independent to continue to develop autonomously, and direct intervention became impractical. This hypothesis raises the question, if they were so powerful, why didn't they leave the picto you want more explicit, irrefutable evidence of your presence, which would be understandable to future generations? Why is their legacy so encrypted and requires such a specific interpretation? Another intriguing mystery is the nature of the legacy left by the Anunnaki. If they were alien visitors, what did they leave behind besides myths? Proponents of paleocontact suggest that their legacy is not only the genetic changes in humanity that may have given us intelligence and accelerated our evolution, but also the fundamental knowledge and technology that became the basis for Sumerian civilization. This can include knowledge of astronomy, for example, knowledge of planets beyond the visible spectrum, mathematics, the hexadecimal system, engineering, irrigation systems, ziggurat construction, as well as social organization and even the principles of government. Perhaps they left behind some hidden artifacts, beacons or bases that are still waiting to be discovered. Some ufologists and conspiracy theorists suggest that the Anunnaki may have left some sort of seed or code in human DNA that could be activated in the future, or they may have continued to observe humanity from afar using their advanced technology. However, academic science categorically rejects these ideas. All the achievements of the Sumerians are attributed to their own genius, hard work, accumulation of empirical experience, and gradual development. There is no archaeological or scientific evidence to support an alien legacy. All secret knowledge and lost technologies can be explained within the framework of human development on Earth. However, for those who are looking for evidence of extraterrestrial interference, these unexplained leaps in the development of ancient civilizations are the strongest argument. The mystery also concerns the possibility of the return of the Anunnaki. Some interpretations of the myths, especially in modern speculation, have the idea that the Anunnaki will return to Earth when their planet Nibiru approaches again. This creates a premonition of both hope and fear, the hope of gaining new knowledge and understanding, technology, and the fear of their potential control or even destruction of humanity. This idea resonates with modern apocalyptic predictions and conspiracy theories. However, the lack of scientific evidence for the existence of Nibiru or its regular approach to Earth makes this idea purely speculative. The mystery of the Anunnaki's disappearance and legacy is not just a question of where the ancient gods have gone. It is a profound exploration of our own fear of the unknown, our eternal hope of contact with more advanced civilizations, and our desire to explain the inexplicable. This reminds us that myths, even if they are not literal stories, can be powerful tools for making sense of our past, present, and future, as well as for raising questions about our place in the universe and the potential existence of life beyond Earth. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the mystery of divination and return, eschatology or ancient programming. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, in addition to describing the past and present, also contain hints about future events and prophecies concerning the fate of the world and humanity. Although they are not prophetic books in the modern sense, such as some parts of the Bible, they nevertheless show a cyclical understanding of time and the expectation of certain events related to divine cycles. Especially intriguing for the proponents of the paleocontact theory is the idea of the return of the Anunnaki, a concept that takes on an almost eschatological character in their interpretation. If the Anunnaki were indeed alien visitors, then their departure from Earth may have been temporary, and ancient prophecies may contain encrypted warnings or instructions regarding their future appearance. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are these ancient predictions and expectations of return only natural manifestations of human eschatology in a cyclical worldview, as understood by academic science, or are they part of ancient programming or instruction left by alien Anunnaki who inform humanity in advance? What are your plans for the future, and how much do these ancient expectations continue to influence modern beliefs and conspiracy theories? The central puzzle is the interpretation of the prophecies in Mesopotamian texts and their relation to cyclical nature. In traditional Assyriology and the study of ancient religions, Mesopotamian thought was deeply cyclical. Time was not perceived as a linear progression, but as repeated cycles associated with the movement of celestial bodies, especially the moon and sun. The flooding of the Nile for Egypt, the change of seasons, and the repetition of mythical events. Each new year was a kind of repetition of the act of creation, and the reign of a new ruler was a rebirth of the cosmic order. In this context, Prophecies may have been predictions of recurring events, such as harvests, floods, and military conflicts, based on observations and empirical experience, rather than supernatural predictions of future, unique events. The purpose of such predictions was not to tell the future as something new, but to help people prepare for the expected cycles, maintain order, and propitiate the gods to ensure their favorable passage. The expectation of the return of the gods could be part of this cyclical worldview, a kind of religious promise or hope to restore the golden age or to further divine intervention. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see it as something more. They claim that the cycles described in ancient texts are actually the orbital cycles of the planet Nibiru, and the return of Iranon of the Anunnaki is the literal return of their home planet to the solar system, which, according to their theory, occurs every 3,600 Earth years. Thus, the ancient prophecies are not just religious expectations, but a schedule or plan left by the Anunnaki to humanity. They could warn people about their future return and possibly about the events that would accompany it. This begs the question, how specific and detailed were these prophecies to be interpreted as anything more than general premonitions or mythological images? And why, if the Anunnaki wanted to be understood, didn't they leave clearer and more unambiguous instructions or messages? Another intriguing mystery is the potential ancient programming, or instructing, of humanity. If the Anunnaki, as Sitchin suggests, genetically modified humans, then they may also have programmed them to behave in a certain way, to wait for their return, or to perform certain tasks in the future. This idea echoes the concept of ancient astronauts who could sow the seeds of civilization on Earth and then observe its development, preparing for a new contact. Proponents of this theory point to some strange coincidences in human history, such as sudden technological leaps, and whether the emergence of certain cultural traditions, which in their opinion could be the result of external interference or activation of ancient programming. In this context, the expectation of the end of the world or new coming in various religions can be a subconscious memory of past contacts or the upcoming return of the Anunnaki. Academic science, of course, rejects these ideas as purely speculative constructions that have no scientific basis. Human development is explained by natural evolutionary processes, and all coincidences are the result of cultural diffusion, parallel development, or archetypal patterns of thought. No genetic codes or programming left behind by extraterrestrials have been found. However, this hypothesis raises fundamental questions about the nature of human consciousness, its ability to learn and develop, and how confident we can be of our full autonomy. The mystery also concerns the impact of these ancient expectations on modern conspiracy theories and popular culture. The idea of the return of the Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru has become a central element of many modern conspiracy theories, especially in near-scientific circles and among ufologists. Predictions of the end of the world. In 2012, based on the interpretation of the Mayan calendar, were often associated with the expected arrival of Nibiru. Although these predictions have not come true and their connection with ancient texts is highly questionable, it demonstrates how strongly ancient myths and their alternative interpretations can influence modern consciousness, generating new ones, beliefs and fears. It also shows our constant desire to find answers to questions about the meaning of life, the fate of humanity, and our place in the universe, especially in the face of global crises and uncertainty. Perhaps these predictions and expectations of the return of the Anunnaki are not only a reflection of ancient myths, but also a projection of our own hopes and fears about the future. The mystery of the Anunnaki's predictions and return is not just a question of what the ancient Sumerians thought of the future. It is an in-depth study of how myths shape our worldview, how they can be interpreted differently depending on cultural context and scientific beliefs, and how our own need for meaning and predictability, it can lead to the creation of complex and sometimes fantastic explanations. And this mystery is likely to continue to haunt people's minds until we find definitive answers to questions about the origin of life in the universe and our own place in it. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors? The secret of gold and resources, divine needs or energy addiction. One of the most provocative and, for many, least convincing aspects of Zachary Sitchin's theory of the Anunnaki as extraterrestrials is their alleged obsession with gold. According to his interpretation of Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki came to Earth not for spiritual guidance or civilizational aid, but for a very pragmatic purpose to extract gold, which was vital for their home planet Nibiru. Sitchin argued that the atmosphere of Nibiru was being depleted, and gold in the form of fine dust had to be sprayed into the upper atmosphere to create a protective shield. This unusual motivation raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is the idea of Anunnaki gold just a fantasy of the modern interpreter who has arbitrarily superimposed his own ideas about the resource economy on ancient myths? Or does it contain a grain of truth, pointing to the unknown properties of gold, its potential technological application in the context of natural resources? An extraterrestrial civilization? And how does this explain the surprisingly early and large-scale development of gold mining and metallurgy in the ancient world? The central mystery is the incomprehensible value of gold to the Anunnaki. In traditional archaeology and history, gold has always been prized by mankind for its beauty, rarity, inertness, not subject to corrosion, and malleability, making it ideal for jewelry, ceremonial objects, and symbols of status and wealth. Gold had no practical value for everyday life or agriculture. However, Sitchin puts forward a much more complex theory. He claims that the Anunnaki, faced with the problem of atmospheric depletion on Nibiru, discovered that colloidal gold, gold dust, could be used to deflect solar radiation and stabilize their atmosphere, thereby saving their planet. This idea, while seemingly sci-fi, is supported by current research in nanotechnology, where gold does show unique properties, such as the ability to reflect radiation and catalytic properties. For example, gold nanoparticles are used in some areas of medicine and space technology. This raises the question, is it possible that the ancient gods had knowledge of such properties of gold that were completely unknown to primitive humanity? And if this is so, then why do the ancient texts not explicitly describe this technological need, but only talk about divine requirements for gold and other gifts? Academic science categorically rejects this theory, pointing out the complete absence of any evidence supporting the technological use of gold in ancient times to save the atmosphere, as well as the lack of evidence for the existence of Nibiru itself and its problems with the atmosphere. In addition, the mere availability of gold in Mesopotamia was relatively limited, which made it even more valuable, but not enough to require massive interplanetary mining. That, however, the mystery remains. If gold was so important to the Anunnaki, how did they organize large-scale mining of this metal using primitive human labor? Could they have passed on knowledge of metal mining and processing techniques which led to the rapid development of metallurgy in Mesopotamia? Another intriguing mystery is the role of gold in rituals and funerary rites. Gold was widely used in ancient Egypt, where it was much more abundant than in Mesopotamia, and to some extent in Mesopotamia for making funerary masks, sarcophagi, statues of gods, and sacred objects. It symbolized eternity, incorruptibility, divine nature, and connection with the sun. For traditional religious studies, this is the natural use of precious metal in the context of the sacred. However, for proponents of paleocontact, this may be due to the energy or technological properties of gold, which may have been known to the Anunnaki. It is possible that gold was used not only as a decoration, but also as some kind of energy conductor, storage, or even a source of spiritual or vital energy that the Anunnaki could use. Some proponents of alternative theories even suggest that monatomic gold, which they claim has special quantum properties, may have been one of the secrets of the Anunnaki, which they used to extend life or for their technologies. However, all these ideas remain in the realm of fiction, since there is no scientific evidence to support such properties of gold or its use in ancient times. However, this hypothesis raises the question of how limited our current understanding of the properties of materials and technologies is, and whether ancient civilizations, or their mentors, might have possessed the knowledge that we are just beginning to discover. The mystery also concerns the geography and scale of ancient gold mining. If the Anunnaki needed gold in such huge quantities, where exactly was it mined? Sumerian texts do not contain direct references to massive gold mines in Mesopotamia. It is assumed that the gold may have come from Nubia, in the case of Egypt, or from other remote regions, which required a huge logistical effort. Proponents of the paleocontact theory suggest that the Anunnaki may have organized gold mining in Africa, for example in South Africa, where there is very ancient but controversial evidence of mines, and then transported it to Mesopotamia for processing and sending it to Nibiru. This, of course, has no archaeological evidence. However, this hypothesis makes us think about how much we underestimate the scale and complexity of resource operations in the ancient world. The mystery of gold and resources in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of what the ancient gods valued, it is an in-depth exploration of how our modern technological concepts can be superimposed on ancient myths, creating new, sometimes fantastic interpretations. This reminds us that even the most material aspects of ancient cultures can be the subject of endless debate until we find more convincing evidence that can either definitively confirm or refute the most ambitious hypotheses. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors? The secret of the Dendarian zodiac and astronomical maps. Ancient astronomy or extraterrestrial heritage? Among the treasures of ancient Egyptian astronomy and cosmology, one of the most mysterious and often mentioned in the context of alternative theories is the Dendarian zodiac. This unique bas-relief found on the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt, is a map of the starry sky depicting constellations, planets, and other astronomical objects in a circular format. Although it belongs to a relatively late period of Egyptian history, Ptolemaic era, 1st century BC, its depiction is highly controversial and raises one of the most intriguing mysteries. Is the Dendarian zodiac, like other ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian astronomical maps and texts, just the result of painstaking, centuries-old sky observations and development Earth astronomy, as academic science claims, or does it contain encrypted information about more advanced, possibly extraterrestrial knowledge transmitted to humanity by the Anunnaki, and how these ancient sky maps could have been created without modern tools? The central puzzle is the detail and supposed accuracy of the Dendarian zodiac. Traditional Egyptology views the Dendarian zodiac as an astronomical diagram that reflects the Egyptians' understanding of the celestial sphere and their understanding of the zodiac constellations that were borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians. It was used for calendar and religious purposes, allowing priests to predict important astronomical events related to holidays. This was evidence of the advanced astronomical culture of the Egyptians, based on thousands of years of observations of the movement of stars and planets. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory, in particular some ufologists and researchers of mysterious artifacts, point out several aspects that, in their opinion, go beyond the usual ancient astronomical knowledge. First, it is an image of celestial bodies that are not visible to the naked eye, such as Uranus and Neptune. Although their presence on the zodiac is a matter of interpretation and controversy, since their symbols can be interpreted in different ways. Second, some claim that the zodiac contains information about the precession of the equinoxes, the slow swaying of the Earth's axis, which leads to changes in the apparent position of stars in the sky for very long periods. One precession cycle is about 25,120 years, the so-called Great Year. Knowledge of precession requires observations over thousands of years, which, according to proponents of paleocontact, is impossible for a primitive civilization without external help. If so, where did the Egyptians get this knowledge? Could the Anunnaki, who had interstellar travel and a long lifespan, have passed on this information gathered over thousands of years? This raises the question, is it possible that ancient people, without a modern scientific language, described complex astronomical phenomena using the symbols and images available to them? Or is it just a modern, retroactive interpretation that overlays scientific concepts on ancient artifacts? Another intriguing mystery is the technology behind creating these maps and surveillance tools. The ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians are known to have used simple instruments for astronomical observations: sundials, plumb lines, levels, and careful observations of the horizon and starry sky. Their astronomical knowledge was largely empirical and based on repeated observations. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis wonder, how could they create sky maps as accurate and detailed as the Dendarian zodiac without telescopes or other optical instruments? They believe that the Anunnaki, as technologically advanced beings, could have provided the ancient Egyptians or Sumerians with more sophisticated observation instruments, or at least passed them ready-made astronomical data, which were then imprinted on the walls of temples. Some even claim that certain symbols on the zodiac or other ancient astronomical images may be pointers to extraterrestrial objects or phenomena that the Anunnaki may have demonstrated to ancient people. Academic science explains this by saying that the accuracy of ancient maps was achieved thanks to thousands of years of unarmed observations, which with a systematic approach could be very accurate, especially for visible celestial bodies. The knowledge of precession, if any, could have been the result of a very long period of accumulated observations passed down from generation to generation by the ascetic priests, or it could have been just a coincidence or misinterpretation. The mystery also concerns the connection between astronomy and religious worship. In ancient Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, astronomy was inextricably linked to religion. Celestial bodies were associated with gods, and their movements influenced religious festivals and rituals. The sun Ra, the moon Thoth, Khonsu, Sirius, Sopdet Isis, and Orion, Osiris, all played a central role in mythology and worship. For traditional science, this is a natural development, where celestial phenomena are deified. However, proponents of paleocontact see this as evidence that the Anunnaki used their astronomical knowledge to reinforce their divine status. They could predict celestial events, eclipses, comets, heliacal star rises, using their advanced knowledge, which to primitive people seemed to be a manifestation of divine power and omniscience. This allowed the Anunnaki to control humanity through fear and awe, and perhaps it was these predictions that were encoded in artifacts such as the Dendarian zodiac as a kind of textbook or instruction for future generations of priests. The mystery of the Dendarian zodiac and other astronomical maps is not just a question of what the ancient people knew about the stars. It is a profound study of how knowledge, faith, and power intertwined in ancient civilizations, and how we, with our modern optics, interpret this ancient evidence. This reminds us that even the most seemingly scientific artifacts of antiquity can be the source of the most daring hypotheses, and that the boundary between myth and reality, especially in matters of extraterrestrial contact, remains a subject of endless debate and debate. Exciting research. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of divination and return. Eschatology or ancient programming. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, in addition to describing the past and present, also contain hints about future events and prophecies concerning the fate of the world and humanity. Although they are not prophetic books in the modern sense, such as some parts of the Bible, they nevertheless show a cyclical understanding of time and the expectation of certain events related to divine cycles. Especially intriguing for the proponents of the paleocontact theory is the idea of the return of the Anunnaki, a concept that takes on an almost eschatological character in their interpretation. If the Anunnaki were indeed alien visitors, then their departure from Earth may have been temporary, and ancient prophecies may contain encrypted warnings or instructions regarding their future appearance. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are these ancient predictions and expectations of return only natural manifestations of human eschatology in a cyclical worldview, as understood by academic science? Or are they part of ancient programming or instruction left by alien Anunnaki who informed humanity in advance? What are your plans for the future, and how much do these ancient expectations continue to influence modern beliefs and conspiracy theories? The central puzzle is the interpretation of the prophecies in Mesopotamian texts and their relation to cyclical nature. In traditional Assyriology and the study of ancient religions, Mesopotamian thought was deeply cyclical. Time was not perceived as a linear progression, but as repeated cycles associated with the movement of celestial bodies, especially the moon and sun, the flooding of the Nile for Egypt, the change of seasons, and the repetition of mythical events. Each new year was a kind of repetition of the act of creation, and the reign of a new ruler was a rebirth of the cosmic order. In this context, the prophecies may have been predictions of recurring events, such as harvests, floods, and military conflicts, based on observations and empirical experience, rather than supernatural predictions of future, unique events. The purpose of such predictions was not to tell the future as something new, but to help people prepare for the expected cycles, maintain order, and propitiate the gods to ensure their favorable passage. The expectation of the return of the gods could be part of this cyclical worldview, a kind of religious promise or hope to restore the golden age or to further divine intervention. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see it as something more. They claim that the cycles described in ancient texts are actually the orbital cycles of the planet Nibiru, and the return of the Anunnaki is the literal return of their home planet to the solar system, which, according to their theory, occurs every 3,600 Earth years. Thus, the ancient prophecies are not just religious expectations, but a schedule or plan left by the Anunnaki to humanity. They could warn people about their future return and possibly about the events that would accompany it. This begs the question, how specific and detailed were these prophecies to be interpreted as anything more than general premonitions or mythological images? And why, if the Anunnaki wanted to be understood, didn't they leave clearer and more unambiguous instructions or messages? Another intriguing mystery is the potential ancient programming or instructing of humanity. If the Anunnaki, as Sitchin suggests, genetically modified humans, then they may also have programmed them to behave in a certain way, to wait for their return, or to perform certain tasks in the future. This idea echoes the concept of ancient astronauts who could sow the seeds of civilization on Earth and then observe its development, preparing for a new contact. Proponents of this theory point to some strange coincidences in human history, such as sudden technological leaps and whether the emergence of certain cultural traditions, which in their opinion could be the result of external interference or activation of ancient programming. In this context, the expectation of the end of the world, or new coming, in various religions can be a subconscious memory of past contacts or the upcoming return of the Anunnaki. Academic science, of course, rejects these ideas as purely speculative constructions that have no scientific basis. Human development is explained by natural evolutionary processes, and all coincidences are the result of cultural diffusion, parallel development, or archetypal patterns of thought. No genetic codes or programming left behind by extraterrestrials have been found. However, this hypothesis raises fundamental questions about the nature of human consciousness, its ability to learn and develop, and how confident we can be of our full autonomy. The mystery also concerns the impact of these ancient expectations on modern conspiracy theories in popular culture. The idea of the return of the Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru has become a central element of many modern conspiracy theories, especially in near-scientific circles and among ufologists. Predictions of the end of the world. In 2012, based on the interpretation of the Mayan calendar, were often associated with the expected arrival of Nibiru. Although these predictions have not come true, and their connection with ancient texts is highly questionable, it demonstrates how strongly ancient myths and their alternative interpretations can influence modern consciousness, generating new ones, beliefs and fears. It also shows our constant desire to find answers to questions about the meaning of life, the fate of humanity, and our place in the universe, especially in the face of global crises and uncertainty. Perhaps these predictions and expectations of the return of the Anunnaki are not only a reflection of ancient myths, but also a projection of our own hopes and fears about the future. The mystery of the Anunnaki's predictions and return is not just a question of what the ancient Sumerians thought of the future. It is an in-depth study of how myths shape our worldview, how they can be interpreted differently depending on cultural context and scientific beliefs, and how our own need for meaning and predictability, it can lead to the creation of complex and sometimes fantastic explanations. And this mystery is likely to continue to haunt people's minds until we find definitive answers to questions about the origin of life in the universe and our own place in it. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of gold and resources, divine needs or energy addiction. One of the most provocative and for many least convincing aspects of Zachary Sitchin's theory of the Anunnaki as extraterrestrials is their alleged obsession with gold. According to his interpretation of Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki came to Earth not for spiritual guidance or civilizational aid, but for a very pragmatic purpose to extract gold, which was vital for their home planet Nibiru. Sitchin argued that the atmosphere of Nibiru was being depleted, and gold in the form of fine dust had to be sprayed into the upper atmosphere to create a protective shield. This unusual motivation raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is the idea of Anunnaki gold just a fantasy of the modern interpreter, who has arbitrarily superimposed his own ideas about the resource economy on ancient myths? Or does it contain a grain of truth, pointing to the unknown properties of gold, its potential technological application in the context of natural resources, and extraterrestrial civilization? And how does this explain the surprisingly early and large-scale development of gold mining and metallurgy in the ancient world? The central mystery is the incomprehensible value of gold to the Anunnaki. In traditional archaeology and history, gold has always been prized by mankind for its beauty, rarity, inertness, not subject to corrosion, and malleability, making it ideal for jewelry, ceremonial objects, and symbols of status and wealth. Gold had no practical value for everyday life or agriculture. However, Sitchin puts forward a much more complex theory. He claims that the Anunnaki, faced with the problem of atmospheric depletion on Nibiru, discovered that colloidal gold, gold dust, could be used to deflect solar radiation and stabilize their atmosphere, thereby saving their planet. This idea, while seemingly sci-fi, is supported by current research in nanotechnology, where gold does show unique properties, such as the ability to reflect radiation and catalytic properties. For example, gold nanoparticles are used in some areas of medicine and space technology. This raises the question, is it possible that the ancient gods had knowledge of such properties of gold that were completely unknown to primitive humanity? And if this is so, then why do the ancient texts not explicitly describe this technological need, but only talk about divine requirements for gold and other gifts? Academic science categorically rejects this theory, pointing out the complete absence of any evidence supporting the technological use of gold in ancient times to save the atmosphere, as well as the lack of evidence for the existence of Nibiru itself and its problems with the atmosphere. In addition, the mere availability of gold in Mesopotamia was relatively limited, which made it even more valuable, but not enough to require massive interplanetary mining. That, however, the mystery remains. If gold was so important to the Anunnaki, how did they organize large-scale mining of this metal using primitive human labor? Could they have passed on knowledge of metal mining and processing techniques which led to the rapid development of metallurgy in Mesopotamia? Another intriguing mystery is the role of gold in rituals and funerary rites. Gold was widely used in ancient Egypt, where it was much more abundant than in Mesopotamia, and to some extent in Mesopotamia for making funerary masks, sarcophagi, statues of gods, and sacred objects. It symbolized eternity, incorruptibility, divine nature, and connection with the sun. For traditional religious studies, this is the natural use of precious metal in the context of the sacred. However, for proponents of paleocontact, this may be due to the energy or technological properties of gold, which may have been known to the Anunnaki. It is possible that gold was used not only as a decoration, but also as some kind of energy conductor, storage, or even a source of spiritual or vital energy that the Anunnaki could use. Some proponents of alternative theories even suggest that monoatomic gold, which they claim has special quantum properties, may have been one of the secrets of the Anunnaki, which they used to extend life or for their technologies. However, all these ideas remain in the realm of fiction, since there is no scientific evidence to support such properties of gold or its use in ancient times. However, this hypothesis raises the question of how limited our current understanding the properties of materials and technologies is, and whether ancient civilizations or their mentors might have possessed the knowledge that we are just beginning to discover. The mystery also concerns the geography and scale of ancient gold mining. If the Anunnaki needed gold in such huge quantities, where exactly was it mined? Sumerian texts do not contain direct references to massive gold mines in Mesopotamia. It is assumed that the gold may have come from Nubia, in the case of Egypt, or from other remote regions, which required a huge logistical effort. Proponents of the paleocontact theory suggest that the Anunnaki may have organized gold mining in Africa, for example in South Africa, where there is very ancient but controversial evidence of mines, and then transported it to Mesopotamia for processing and sending it to Nibiru. This, of course, has no archaeological evidence. However, this hypothesis makes us think about how much we underestimate the scale and complexity of resource operations in the ancient world. The mystery of gold and resources in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of what the ancient gods valued. It is an in-depth exploration of how our modern technological concepts can be superimposed on ancient myths, creating new, sometimes fantastic interpretations. This reminds us that even the most material aspects of ancient cultures can be the subject of endless debate until we find more convincing evidence that can either definitively confirm or refute the most ambitious hypotheses. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of cult and worship, religious faith or forced obedience. Ancient Mesopotamian texts and archaeological evidence strongly attest to the deep-rooted cult and worship of the Anunnaki by the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. These entities were central figures in their religious life. They were addressed in prayers, grandiose ziggurat temples were built for them, sacrifices were made to them, and their will was considered absolute. The whole fabric of life in the ancient Mesopotamian city-states was organized around serving the gods, who were believed to control every aspect of existence, from river floods and crops to wars and the fate of entire dynasties. However, for the proponents of the paleocontact theory, this worship takes on a completely different connotation. They interpret it not as a traditional religious belief in supernatural entities, but as a forced obedience or even fear of technologically superior beings who demanded to be worshipped and served. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Whether the worship of the Anunnaki was a sincere expression of religious reverence and a desire to connect with the divine, as academic science understands it, or whether it was a form of social control imposed by alien visitors, wows their technological power to force primitive humanity to serve them, and whether it was a form of social control imposed by what was the real relationship between gods and humans in this complex hierarchy. The central mystery lies in the nature of the divinity of the Anunnaki and its perception by ancient people. In traditional Egyptology and Assyriology, the gods of Mesopotamia, including the Anunnaki, are typical polytheistic deities with supernatural powers, controlling the natural elements in human affairs. Their power and authority are explained by their divine nature, and their worship is a natural human reaction to the incomprehensible forces of nature and the desire to find meaning in the world. Temples were places of communion with the gods, and rituals were ways to propitiate them, receive blessings, or learn their will. The gods in Mesopotamian mythology, while powerful, also possessed human traits. They could quarrel, envy, love, and hate, which made them more understandable to people. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers offer a radically different interpretation. They claim that the divinity of the Anunnaki was only an illusion created by their technological superiority. For primitive humanity, which witnessed the landing of gods on celestial chariots, their ability to move through the air, the use of unknown weapons, for example, weapons of thunder, which could be firearms or energy weapons, as well as their capabilities in the field of genetics, human creation, and engineering, construction complex structures, these creatures seemed omnipotent. Thus, worship was not a spiritual act, but a forced recognition of authority and power. People saw the Anunnaki as masters who needed to be served in order to survive and gain access to their knowledge and resources. In texts where the gods complain about the noise of humanity and decide to destroy it with a flood, supporters of paleocontact see the annoyance of the colonialists with their slaves and not divine retribution. This raises the question, is it possible that ancient people, without having a scientific language, described advanced technologies and social structures of an alien civilization using religious and mythological concepts available to them? Or is it just a modern, retroactive interpretation that puts scientific concepts on top of ancient myths? Another intriguing mystery is the system of giving and serving the gods. In Mesopotamian temples, priests brought daily food, drinks, incense, clothing, and jewelry to the gods. These donations were a central part of the cult. Traditional science explains this as a symbolic expression of gratitude and dependence on the gods, as well as a way to maintain the temple economy and social hierarchy. Temples were not only religious centers, but also economic, administrative, and educational institutions. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis interpret this as servicing and supplying the alien overlords. They suggest that the Anunnaki needed some Earth resources, for example, gold, which according to Sitchin's theory was necessary for their planet Nibiru, as well as a constant supply of food and other material goods. Donations were not symbolic, but literal supplies that humanity was obligated to provide to its creators and masters. Moreover, in texts where the gods complain that they are hungry if they are not offered sacrifices, the proponents of paleocontact see literal hunger and not a metaphor for lack of worship. This begs the question, if the Anunnaki were so technologically advanced that they could travel between the stars, why would they need primitive food and hand-mined gold? Perhaps their technologies did not require specific Earth resources, or their biology was adapted to specific Earth products. Or, as some suggest, it was a way to control and maintain humanity's dependence, as well as a way to encourage hard work and create a hierarchical society that was beneficial to the gods. The puzzle also concerns hierarchy and social structure among the Anunnaki and its reflection in human society. Ancient texts describe a complex hierarchy among the gods: the supreme god Enlil, the god of wisdom Enki, the goddess of love and war, Ishtar, Inanna, and many others, each with their own functions and spheres of influence. They had their own houses, temples, and cities on Earth. This divine hierarchy is generally perceived as reflecting the social and political structure of Sumerian society: king, priests, officials, artisans. However, proponents of paleocontact see this as a literal rejection of the social hierarchy of an alien colony or expedition. Enlil could be the commander, Enki the chief scientist or geneticist, and the other Anunnaki various specialists responsible for certain aspects of the colony. Their council could be a board of government that makes decisions about Earth and humanity. And this hierarchy was, in their opinion, copied by humanity in creating its own governments and social systems, which explains the sudden appearance of complex state structures in Sumer. The mystery of the cult and worship of the Anunnaki is not just a question of the nature of ancient religions. It is an in-depth study of how power, whether divine or technological, can influence the formation of social relations, ethics and morals, and how people perceive their place in a complex hierarchy. This reminds us that even the most fundamental aspects of human culture, such as religion, can be interpreted in different ways, offering radically different views of our past and the potential impact of external forces on our civilization. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The secret of the Dendarian zodiac and astronomical maps. Ancient astronomy or extraterrestrial heritage. Among the treasures of ancient Egyptian astronomy and cosmology, one of the most mysterious and often mentioned in the context of alternative theories is the Dendarian zodiac. This unique bas-relief found on the ceiling of the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt, is a map of the starry sky depicting constellations, planets, and other astronomical objects in a circular format. Although it belongs to a relatively late period of Egyptian history, Ptolemaic era, 1st century BC, its depiction is highly controversial and raises one of the most intriguing mysteries, is the Dendarian zodiac. Like other ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian astronomical maps and texts, just the result of painstaking, centuries-old sky observations and development Earth astronomy, as academic science claims, or does it contain encrypted information about more advanced, possibly extraterrestrial knowledge transmitted to humanity by the Anunnaki, and how these ancient sky maps could have been created without modern tools? The central puzzle is the detail and supposed accuracy of the Dendarian zodiac. Traditional Egyptology views the Dendarian zodiac as an astronomical diagram that reflects the Egyptians' understanding of the celestial sphere and their understanding of the zodiac constellations that were borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians. It was used for calendar and religious purposes, allowing priests to predict important astronomical events related to holidays. This was evidence of the advanced astronomical culture of the Egyptians, based on thousands of years of observations of the movement of stars and planets. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory, in particular some ufologists and researchers of mysterious artifacts, point out several aspects that, in their opinion, go beyond the usual ancient astronomical knowledge. First, it is an image of celestial bodies that are not visible to the naked eye, such as Uranus and Neptune. Although their presence on the zodiac is a matter of interpretation and controversy, since their symbols can be interpreted in different ways. Second, some claim that the zodiac contains information about the precession of the equinoxes, the slow swaying of the Earth's axis, which leads to changes in the apparent position of stars in the sky for very long periods. One precession cycle is about 25,120 years, the so-called Great Year. Knowledge of precession requires observations over thousands of years, which, according to proponents of paleocontact, is impossible for a primitive civilization without external help. If so, where did the Egyptians get this knowledge? Could the Anunnaki, who had interstellar travel and a long lifespan, have passed on this information gathered over thousands of years? This raises the question, is it possible that ancient people, without a modern scientific language, described complex astronomical phenomena using the symbols and images available to them? Or is it just a modern, retroactive interpretation that overlays scientific concepts on ancient artifacts? Another intriguing mystery is the technology behind creating these maps and surveillance tools. The ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians are known to have used simple instruments for astronomical observations: sundials, plumb lines, levels, and careful observations of the horizon and starry sky. Their astronomical knowledge was largely empirical and based on repeated observations. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis wonder, how could they create sky maps as accurate and detailed as the Dendarian zodiac without telescopes or other optical instruments? They believe that the Anunnaki, as technologically advanced beings, could have provided the ancient Egyptians or Sumerians with more sophisticated observation instruments, or at least passed them ready-made astronomical data, which were then imprinted on the walls of temples. Some even claim that certain symbols on the zodiac or other ancient astronomical images may be pointers to extraterrestrial objects or phenomena that the Anunnaki may have demonstrated to ancient people. Academic science explains this by saying that the accuracy of ancient maps was achieved thanks to thousands of years of unarmed observations, which with a systematic approach could be very accurate, especially for visible celestial bodies. The knowledge of precession, if any, could have been the result of a very long period of accumulated observations passed down from generation to generation by the ascetic priests, or it could have been just a coincidence or misinterpretation. The mystery also concerns the connection between astronomy and religious worship. In ancient Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, astronomy was inextricably linked to religion. Celestial bodies were associated with gods, and their movements influenced religious festivals and rituals. The sun Ra, the moon Thoth Khonsu, Sirius, Sopdet Isis, and Orion Osiris all played a central role in mythology and worship. For traditional science, this is a natural development where celestial phenomena are deified. However, proponents of paleocontact see this as evidence that the Anunnaki used their astronomical knowledge to reinforce their divine status. They could predict celestial events, eclipses, comets, heliacal star rises, using their advanced knowledge, which to primitive people seemed to be a manifestation of divine power and omniscience. This allowed the Anunnaki to control humanity through fear and awe. And perhaps it was these predictions that were encoded in artifacts such as the Dendarian zodiac as a kind of textbook or instruction for future generations of priests. The mystery of the Dendarian zodiac and other astronomical maps is not just a question of what the ancient people knew about the stars. It is a profound study of how knowledge, faith, and power intertwined in ancient civilizations, and how we, with our modern optics, interpret this ancient evidence. This reminds us that even the most seemingly scientific artifacts of antiquity can be the source of the most daring hypotheses, and that the boundary between myth and reality, especially in matters of extraterrestrial contact, remains a subject of endless debate and debate. Exciting research. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors? The secret of the ancient Sumerians in the Golden Age. The miracle of autochthonous development or the legacy of extraterrestrial knowledge? At the heart of the Anunnaki mystery is an amazing phenomenon known as the Sumerian miracle or the Golden Age of Mesopotamia. Around the 4th millennium BC, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers experienced an unprecedented leap in the development of human civilization. The first city-states appeared, such as Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, a complex social structure, centralized administration, monumental architecture, ziggurats, developed irrigation systems, advanced knowledge in astronomy and mathematics for its time, and most importantly, cuneiform writing, one of the oldest forms of writing in the world. This sudden and rapid progress in a region previously inhabited by relatively primitive agricultural communities is deeply puzzling and raises one of the most fundamental questions. Is this golden age of Sumer solely the result of the autochthonous local development of human genius, the result of millennia of trial and error, the gradual accumulation of knowledge and knowledge? Or is it a direct or indirect legacy of extraterrestrial knowledge and technology transmitted to humanity by the Anunnaki, who served as the teachers or architects of Sumerian civilization? The central puzzle is the pace and scale of Sumerian development. Traditional academic science explains the Sumerian miracle by a complex of interrelated factors. The abundance of water and fertile soils in Mesopotamia contributed to the development of intensive agriculture, which led to a surplus of food. The surplus of food, in turn, allowed to increase the population, stimulated the specialization of labor, the appearance of artisans, priests, warriors, and led to the formation of permanent settlements, which eventually grew into cities. The need to manage complex irrigation systems, as well as record agricultural products and resources, stimulated the development of writing and mathematics. Astronomy developed out of practical needs, creating a calendar for agriculture and predicting river floods. All this is seen as an organic and evolutionary process, although it is very fast by historical standards. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory, in particular Zachary Sitchin, question this organic nature. They indicate no missing links in the development of Sumer. That is, there is no clear archaeological evidence of a long, gradual transition from very primitive forms to such a complex civilization. In their opinion, the Sumerians seemingly appeared out of nowhere with ready-made, highly developed concepts and technologies. They wonder, how could a society that has just mastered agriculture have so quickly developed such a complex system of writing, the 60-number system that is still used in our measurement of time and angles, or such precise astronomical observations? This leads them to conclude that such knowledge and technology could only have been obtained from outside, from a more advanced Anunnaki civilization. The Anunnaki, according to this hypothesis, not only interfered with human development, but also actively taught the Sumerians, passing on to them the fundamental principles and ready-made solutions that allowed the Sumerians to make such a huge leap. Another intriguing mystery is the use of cosmic or unearthly images in Sumerian symbolism and mythology. In addition to the celestial chariots mentioned earlier, references to stars, planets, and other celestial objects are often found in Sumerian texts and images. For example, the Sumerians knew about planets that are not visible to the naked eye, Uranus, Neptune, and also, according to Sitchin's interpretation, about the hypothetical planet Nibiru. Their cosmogony describes the creation of the solar system and planets. Traditional science explains this as the result of thousands of years of painstaking observations of the sky and a developed astronomical tradition, as well as a rich mythological imagination that populated the heavens with gods and mythological creatures. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as direct evidence of briefing by the Anunnaki. They claim that the Anunnaki, as space travelers, passed on to the Sumerians their knowledge of space and the solar system, which was then captured in their myths and symbols. The reference to the 7th or 12th planet, Nibiru, in Sumerian texts is claimed by some to be an accurate reflection of the Anunnaki astronomical knowledge. Moreover, some Sumerian images of gods have strange headdresses or wood accessories that are interpreted as elements of space equipment or spacesuits. This raises the question, how random can such coincidences be in visual art and texts? And how can knowledge about distant planets be explained without modern tools? The mystery also concerns the motivation and role of the Anunnaki as teachers. If the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials, then why did they choose to share their knowledge with primitive humanity? The traditional theory of paleocontact states that this was done in order to create an efficient labor force to mine gold or its resources. However, some proponents of this theory also suggest that the Anunnaki may have been a kind of sower of civilization who saw in humanity the potential for development and decided to channel it, accelerating its progress. They may have had more long-term goals, such as creating an outpost or farm planet that could serve their interests in the future, whether it was a kind of social experimentation where they observed the development of civilization, intervening only when necessary. Academic science, of course, rejects all these scenarios as speculative, pointing out that humanity has always developed independently, overcoming difficulties and creating civilizations thanks to its own efforts and genius. Sumer's golden age is a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability, not external interference. The mystery of the ancient Sumerians and the Golden Age. In the context of the Anunnaki, is not just a question of how civilization came about, it is a profound exploration of the limits of human potential, as well as our eternal quest to find a higher power or extraterrestrial mentors who could explain the most complex and seemingly miraculous phenomena. Aspects of our past. This puzzle continues to stimulate the imagination and inspire new research, forcing us to rethink our understanding of ancient history. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the mystery of etymology and language, divine origin or ancient roots. One of the key elements that proponents of the paleocontact theory rely on is the analysis of the etymology of words and the structure of ancient languages, in particular Sumerian, Akkadian, and other Semitic languages of Mesopotamia. Zachariah Sitchin, based on his translations and interpretations, argued that some words and phrases in these languages contain literal or encrypted references to the Anunnaki's extraterrestrial origin, technology, and human interaction. In particular, the very name Anunnaki, often translated as those who descended from heaven to earth, is seen as a direct reference to their extraterrestrial origin. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is the etymology of the name Anunnaki and other related terms merely a reflection of ancient religious beliefs about gods descending from the heavens, as understood by academic linguistics and religious studies? Or does it contain literal evidence of actual physical landings of extraterrestrial beings? And is it not possible to understand the meaning of the word Anunnaki? How far is it possible to read technological or extraterrestrial meanings in ancient languages that did not have modern scientific terminology? The central puzzle is the translation and interpretation of key terms. The term Anunnaki, Akkadian Anunnaku, Sumerian Anunna, is traditionally interpreted as offspring of an god of the sky, or those who have royal blood, from en, sky, and offspring, and naki, possibly princes or earth. This indicates their celestial origin and high status in the Sumerian pantheon. For academic linguistics, this is a natural language construct that reflects religious beliefs. However, Sitchin, focusing on the first component of Sky, and using his methodology, translated Anunnaki as those who descended from heaven to earth, or those who came from heaven. For him, this is not a metaphor, but a literal description of the way they arrived. He also points out other terms that, in his opinion, have an extraterrestrial origin or are related to technology. For example, he interprets some words describing the homes of the gods as spaceships or landing platforms, or the terms associated with the creation of man he translates as genetic experiments. This raises the question, how arbitrary are these translations, and can such radical interpretations be linguistically justified? Academic linguistics emphasizes that ancient languages have their own structure, grammar, and vocabulary that do not coincide with modern ones. Trying to read modern technological or scientific concepts in them is an anachronism, the imposition of later meanings on ancient texts. The words had their own direct meanings in the context of mythology and religious beliefs, and their decoding as indications of spaceships or genetics is speculative and is not supported by the translation rules of ancient languages. Another intriguing mystery is the origin of the Sumerian language, an isolated language. Sumerian, as already mentioned, has no known kinship with any other language family on Earth. He appeared in Mesopotamia with no obvious antecedents. Traditional linguistics explains this by saying that Sumerian, like many other ancient languages, may have been part of an extinct language family whose traces have not been preserved, or it may have been one of the very few languages that survived in the region. Its uniqueness is not proof of its extraterrestrial origin. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as proof that the Sumerian language could have been introduced from outside or be part of a training course that the Anunnaki passed on to humanity. It may have been a simplified language designed to facilitate communication between extraterrestrials and primitive humans, or else it was a fragment of the language of the Anunnaki themselves, adapted for Earth conditions. This raises the question, if the language was introduced from the outside, then why does it have features characteristic of terrestrial languages? For example, agglutinativity, lack of genera. And why did it evolve over time, like other terrestrial languages? Linguistic analysis does not reveal any unique alien features in Sumerian that would distinguish it from other human languages. The riddle also concerns the role of language in shaping myths and religious beliefs. Ancient languages were closely related to mythology and religion. Words and their meanings often had deep symbolic and ritual connotations. Mythological narratives about the gods, their deeds, and their interactions with humans were an integral part of the language culture. For traditional religious studies, language is the main tool for expressing and communicating religious ideas. However, for proponents of paleocontact, this may be a kind of programming tool through which the Anunnaki transmitted their messages and instructions to humanity. They suggest that the myths were not just stories, but coded messages that were distorted or forgotten over time, but in which one can still find the Yuchi key to the true story. Thus, language becomes not just a means of communication, but a carrier of hidden knowledge and instructions from extraterrestrial teachers. The mystery of etymology and language in the context of the Anunnaki is not just a question of how ancient peoples speak. It's an in-depth study of how language shapes our worldview, how it reflects our ideas about the world and our place in it, and how it can be used to build the most daring theories. This reminds us that even the most fundamental aspects of human culture, such as language, can be a source of endless debate until we find more convincing evidence that can either definitively confirm or refute the most daring hypotheses. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of the destruction of Ur and Jericho, divine wrath or technological disaster. In ancient Near Eastern texts, especially in the Bible, and some Mesopotamian narratives, there are striking descriptions of sudden and catastrophic destruction of cities. Among the most famous examples are the biblical story of the fall of Jericho, whose walls, according to legend, collapsed from the sound of trumpets and shouts, and the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah from fire and brimstone from heaven. Less well-known, but no less dramatic, is the lament for the city of Ur in Sumerian literature. a mournful account of the destruction of the great Sumerian city of Ur, which occurred around the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. Traditional academic scholarship explains these events as the result of natural disasters, military conflicts, or allegorical narratives designed to emphasize divine intervention or moral lessons. However, for proponents of the paleocontact theory, these descriptions take on a completely different, frightening connotation. They interpret them as evidence of the Anunnaki's use of powerful, possibly nuclear or high-energy weapons, which led to the complete destruction of entire cities. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are these ancient accounts of the destruction of cities metaphors for divine wrath and human wars, or do they actually contain encrypted or literally described evidence of technological catastrophes caused by alien gods? And what were the true causes and consequences of these destructions in the context of their supposed presence on Earth? The Earth? The central mystery lies in the unusual nature of the destruction described in the text. In the case of Jericho, the Bible describes the collapse of walls without the direct involvement of siege engines or a prolonged siege, which according to some, indicates some unknown force. The archaeological site of Jericho does show traces of the city's destruction around that time, although the exact cause remains a matter of scientific debate: earthquake, fire, military conquest. As for Sodom and Gomorrah, the description of fire and brimstone from the sky resembles a nuclear explosion or a catastrophic meteor strike accompanied by the ignition of combustible substances. Some scientists suggest that this could have been the result of a meteorite fall or a natural gas explosion. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see in these descriptions signs of the use of nuclear weapons or other high-energy weapons by the Anunnaki. The lament for Ur speaks of a storm that came from the east which brought poison, fire, and death, destroying the city and its inhabitants, turning the earth to ashes. This lament describes in detail the effects of the destruction: charred bodies, destroyed houses, poisoned water, dead silence, and no one steps on the roads. Sitchin interpreted this storm as a nuclear cloud, which was the result of the explosion of nuclear weapons used by the Anunnaki. According to his theory, this was the result of an internal conflict between the Anunnaki factions, when one group used weapons of mass destruction against the territory controlled by the other as a group or as a punitive measure. This raises the question, to what extent do the detailed descriptions in ancient texts correspond to the characteristics of a nuclear explosion or other technological disasters? And if it was a nuclear weapon, why isn't there direct, irrefutable archaeological evidence of radiation or the characteristic fused structures that we see in modern landfills? Academic science explains these storms and fires as poetic metaphors and hyperbole used to describe large-scale destruction, most likely caused by natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, meteor showers, or large-scale military operations. For example, the destruction of Ur may well have been the result of the Elamite invasion. Another intriguing mystery is the motivation of the gods for such a large-scale destruction. If the Anunnaki were the creators or mentors of humanity, why did they decide to destroy it or destroy the cities they may have helped build? In traditional myths, the gods punish people for sins, disobedience, or excessive noise that interferes with their peace. This is explained as moral lessons or a manifestation of divine justice. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as something else, a pragmatic and sometimes ruthless decision by alien colonizers. Perhaps humanity was out of control, or it became a hindrance to their plans, or it was part of an internal power struggle between various Anunnaki factions. For example, Sitchin suggests that the nuclear destruction of Ur was part of the gods' war, in which various Anunnaki used their technological capabilities against each other, and humanity became only collateral damage. This makes the Anunnaki not all good deities, but powerful, but not always moral beings acting in their own interests. This raises questions about the nature of power, responsibility, and the consequences of technological superiority. The mystery also concerns the subsequent silence and oblivion of these catastrophes. If such large-scale destruction caused by technological weapons really took place, Why are their references so fragmentary and metaphorical? And why haven't their effects become more apparent in the archaeological layer? Academic science explains that ancient societies did not have the means to accurately document such events from a scientific point of view. Memories of disasters were transmitted through myths and legends, which over time were distorted and acquired a symbolic character. The lack of direct archaeological evidence for nuclear or high-energy weapons is a crucial argument against such theories. However, proponents of paleocontact argue that some of the evidence may have been erased by time, or they are waiting to be discovered. Perhaps ancient civilizations deliberately encrypted or kept silent about such devastating events out of fear, or because they were too horrific to fully understand. The mystery of the destruction of Ur and Jericho in the context of the Anunnaki is not just a matter of survey of how ancient cities perished, is an in-depth study of how we interpret catastrophes in history, how myths can reflect traumatic events, and how our current technological capabilities affect our perception of antiquity. This reminds us that even the most dramatic and devastating events of the past can be the subject of endless debate until we find more convincing evidence that can either definitively confirm or refute the most daring hypotheses about technological intervention in antiquity. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of the origin of knowledge about the solar system. Empirical observations or transmission of information. One of the most striking aspects of the ancient Mesopotamian texts, which particularly appeals to proponents of the paleocontact theory, is the presence of surprisingly accurate and seemingly premature knowledge about the solar system. The Sumerians are said to have had knowledge of planets that are not visible to the naked eye, Uranus, Neptune, were aware of the presence of several moons on some planets, and even had an idea of a hypothetical 12th planet, Nibiru, which, according to Zechariah Sitchin, is the home of the Anunnaki. This knowledge, which goes beyond what could be observed without telescopes and modern astronomical instruments, raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is this astronomical information the result of thousands of years of painstaking empirical observations passed down from generation to generation, and the brilliant intellectual work of ancient priests, astronomers, as it is understood? Is it academic science, or do they represent a direct or indirect legacy of extraterrestrial knowledge passed down to humanity by the Anunnaki, who, as space travelers, had comprehensive information about our solar system? The central puzzle is the premature knowledge of planets. Traditional academic astronomy and the history of science claim that before the invention of the telescope, humanity was able to observe only 5 planets of the solar system: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Uranus was discovered in 1781 by William Herschel, and Neptune in 1846 by Johann Halle, based on the mathematical calculations of Urbain Le Verrier. However, Zechariah Sitchin, in his translations of Sumerian texts, especially on some cylindrical seals, which according to his interpretation depict the solar system with the exact size and location of the planets, claims that the Sumerians knew about Uranus and Neptune. Moreover, he claims that their cosmology included a 12th planet, Nibiru, or Planet X, which had a very elongated elliptical orbit and period and was very close to Earth. For Sitchin, this is irrefutable proof that the Sumerians received this knowledge from the Anunnaki, who came from Nibiru and therefore were familiar with the entire solar system. He also points out that the Sumerian creation myths, such as Enuma Elish, they contain a detailed description of the formation of the solar system, including collisions between the hypothetical planet Tiamat and Nibiru, which in his opinion corresponds to modern ideas about the formation of planets from a protoplanetary disk. This begs the question, how accurate are Sitchin's translations? And do Sumerian images and texts really literally reflect such advanced astronomical knowledge? Or is it just a modern reinterpretation that overlaps our knowledge with ancient symbols? Academic Assyriology in the history of science rejects Sitchin's claims, pointing out that his translations are often controversial and arbitrary, and that the images he interprets as maps of the solar system are actually symbolic representations of deities and their attributes rather than exact astronomical diagrams. Sumerian texts describe cosmogony in mythological terms, not scientific ones, and their knowledge of planets beyond Saturn is the product of interpretation, not direct evidence. Another intriguing mystery is the number system and its application in astronomy. The Sumerians used the hexadecimal number system, base 60, which was different from our decimal system, base 10, and was very effective for dividing and measuring angles and time. This system is still used in our system of measuring time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and angles 360 degrees in a circle. Proponents of paleocontact sometimes suggest that this system was so perfect and logical for astronomical calculations that it could have been transmitted from the outside by the Anunnaki, who may have used it in their space travel. They argue that such a complex system could not have been invented by primitive humanity without external help. However, academic mathematics and the history of science explain the sexagesimal system as a result of the unique development of Sumerian mathematics, which was very practical for trade, agriculture, and astronomical observations. It had its advantages in working with fractions and divisors, which made it convenient for calculations related to cyclic phenomena, such as the movement of celestial bodies. There's no evidence of its extraterrestrial origin. Rather, it was the result of innovations developed by Sumerian scientists. The mystery also concerns the influence of this astronomical knowledge on Sumerian religion and culture. If the Sumerians received this knowledge from the Anunnaki, how did it affect their culture, mythology, and beliefs? Sumerian gods were often associated with celestial bodies, for example, Nana with the moon, Utu with the sun, Inanna with Venus, Enlil with the constellation Taurus. This, according to proponents of paleocontact, is a direct reflection of the fact that the Anunnaki, who came from other planets, associated with these planets or used them in their movements. Thus, astronomy and religion were inextricably linked, and the worship of the gods was, in fact, the worship of extraterrestrial beings associated with celestial bodies. The mystery of the origin of knowledge about the solar system in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of what the ancient Sumerians knew about the cosmos. It is an in-depth study of how we interpret ancient data, how we try to explain the inexplicable, and how our current scientific achievements affect our understanding of ancient history. This reminds us that even the most fundamental knowledge about the world can be the subject of the most daring hypotheses, and that the line between scientific fact and mythological interpretation remains blurred until definitive and irrefutable evidence is found. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of the origin of agriculture, human genius or extraterrestrial engineering. One of the most fundamental transitions in human history, which fundamentally changed our way of life and laid the foundation for all subsequent civilizations, was the Neolithic Revolution, or the transition from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to agriculture and sedentary pastoralism. Approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, the territory from modern Iraq to the Levant and Egypt, humanity began to systematically cultivate plants, such as wheat, barley, and domesticate animals, goats, sheep, cows. This transition, which is traditionally explained as the result of gradual accumulation of knowledge, climate change, and population pressure, takes on a completely different, more miraculous connotation for proponents of the paleocontact theory. They suggest that the Anunnaki may have intervened in this process, providing humanity with not only knowledge about agriculture, but perhaps even genetically modifying plants and animals to make them more productive, or they may have brought new types of crops to Earth that became the basis for agriculture. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is the origin of agriculture solely the result of human invention and adaptation to changing conditions, as academic science claims? Or is it a legacy of extraterrestrial engineering and training transmitted to humanity by the Anunnaki? And how can we distinguish between these two scenarios in the future? Archaeological data? The central puzzle is the suddenness of the emergence of highly productive crops and domesticated animals. Traditional academic archaeology and agronomy explain the Neolithic Revolution as a long and multifactorial process. At first, people observed the growth of wild plants and the behavior of animals, then began to collect them and drive them, and only then gradually learned to cultivate and domesticate them. This process took thousands of years, was uneven, and involved a lot of trial and error. Climate change since the last ice age, population growth, and the need to ensure stable food sources could be powerful incentives for the transition to agriculture. Plant and animal breeding was carried out by artificial selection. People chose those specimens that were most productive, docile, or resistant to diseases, and used them for further reproduction. This process, which we can still observe today, led to the creation of modern cultivated plants and farm animals. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory question this organic and gradual nature. They point out that some cultivated plants, such as wheat, maize, and domestic animals, such as cows, have a very complex genetic composition, which in their opinion could not be achieved by natural selection or primitive artificial selection in a relatively short period of time. They wonder, how could humanity, without knowledge of genetics and molecular biology, do this? How quickly can such a productive and genetically complex species be created? This leads them to conclude that the Anunnaki, with advanced biotechnologies, could have genetically modified wild plants and animals to make them more productive or suitable for domestication, thereby accelerating the Neolithic revolution. They may even have brought ready-made, highly productive species from other planets to Earth. For them, the creation of humans and the creation of cultivated plants are links in the same chain, demonstrating the advanced genetic capabilities of the Anunnaki. Another intriguing mystery is the presence of instructions for farming in ancient texts and myths. Sumerian and other Near Eastern myths often refer to gods who teach mankind agriculture, irrigation, cattle breeding, and other basics of civilization. For example, the god Enlil was associated with agriculture and crops, and the god Enki with irrigation and minerals. Traditional science interprets these myths as allegorical narratives that reflect the importance of these fields of activity to ancient societies and ascribe their origin to divine intervention to give them sacred meaning and authority. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see these myths as literal or encrypted instructions transmitted by the Anunnaki. They suggest that the Anunnaki not only gave people ready-made crops, but also actively taught them farming methods, how to build irrigation channels, how to sow, how to harvest, how to keep livestock. This explains the sudden emergence of complex agricultural systems and the rapid spread of knowledge in Mesopotamia. Perhaps the divine laws or regulations concerning agriculture were actually technological or agricultural guidelines passed down by the Anunnaki. This raises the question, to what extent are these instructions described in ancient texts in detail so that they can be interpreted as something more than general mythological instructions? And why, if the Anunnaki were so pragmatic in their goals, for example in mining gold, did they spend so much effort on teaching primitive humanity agriculture? The puzzle also concerns the connection between the agricultural revolution and the emergence of complex societies. The transition to agriculture led to an increase in population, the emergence of food surpluses, which in turn stimulated trade, labor specialization, and eventually the emergence of cities, states, and complex social hierarchies. Proponents of neocontact suggest that the Anunnaki may have actively managed this process, creating conditions for the development of agriculture in order to provide a stable base of resources and labor for their needs. Thus, they could be not just teachers, but also architects of early civilizations, shaping their structure and development in their own interests. This, in their opinion, explains the amazing speed with which Sumer evolved from a small settlement to an advanced civilization. Academic science, however, emphasizes that this process was endogenous. That is, it developed from within human society. Population growth and economic needs naturally led to a more complex social structure. Absence of any direct archaeological evidence of genetic modification of plants and animals, the existence of extraterrestrial beings, as well as any technological tools that could be used for such purposes, makes these hypotheses purely speculative. The mystery of the origins of agriculture in the Anunnaki context isn't just a question of how we started growing food. It's a deep exploration of the limits of human invention, adaptation, and the potential impact of external factors on our development. This reminds us that even the most fundamental aspects of human civilization can be the subject of the most daring hypotheses, and that the line between myth, science, and fiction remains blurred until definitive and irrefutable evidence is found. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of interstellar wars and planetary conflicts, mythological battles or space battles. Ancient Mesopotamian myths, especially Sumerian and Akkadian cosmogonic epics such as Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, contain striking descriptions of grandiose conflicts between the gods. These battles are not limited to Earth, but are said to take place in space, affecting planets and celestial bodies. The gods use powerful weapons, their collisions lead to destruction and the formation of new space objects. Traditional academic science interprets these narratives as mythological allegories that symbolize natural phenomena. For example, comet collisions, planet formation, or the struggle of the cosmos with chaos, as well as a reflection of social and political conflicts between various deities and their cities on Earth. However, for proponents of the paleo-contact theory, in particular for Zachary Sitchin, these descriptions take on a completely different, literal meaning. They see them as encrypted or literally described evidence of actual interstellar wars or planetary conflicts that were fought between the Anunnaki in space or between the Anunnaki and other extraterrestrial civilizations. This raises a deep and still inexplicable mystery. Are these ancient tales of wars of the gods just the fruit of a rich mythological imagination designed to explain the cosmos and human nature? Or do they really contain hidden information about space battles that took place in our solar system involving technologically advanced alien beings and how these events were resolved? Battles could affect the formation of the Earth and other planets? The central mystery lies in the cosmic scale and nature of the weapons in these myths. Enuma Elish, for example, describes a battle between the young god Marduk and the ancient chaos goddess Tiamat. Marduk uses powerful winds, fire arrows, and storm chariot to defeat Tiamat, whose body then disintegrates to form the earth and sky clouds. This myth, according to the traditional interpretation, symbolizes the victory of order over chaos, and also explains cosmogony, the origin of the world. However, Zachariah Sitchin offers a radically different interpretation. He claims that Tiamat was a real planet that was located between Mars and Jupiter, now the asteroid belt, and Marduk was the planet Nibiru. Their battle is a real cosmic collision between two planets, as a result of which one planet, Tiamat, was destroyed, and its fragments formed the Earth, part of Tiamat, and the asteroid belt. Marduk's weapons, in his opinion, are the technological means that Nibiru used to influence Tiamat. This scenario, which Sitchin calls a cosmic battle, is central to his theory of the formation of the solar system and the origin of the Earth. He also points out other myths in which the gods fight using glittering weapons, fire rays, and heavenly chariots, which, according to his interpretation, resemble spaceships and high-energy weapons. This raises the question, to what extent do the detailed descriptions in ancient myths correspond to modern scientific theories about the formation of submarines and cosmic collisions? And if these were real battles, then why is there no direct, irrefutable astronomical or geological evidence to support the collision of Nibiru with Tiamat? Academic astronomy and geology reject this theory of Sitchin, pointing out that the formation of the solar system is explained by standard models of accretion and gravitational interaction, and not by cosmic battles of planets. The asteroid belt is considered to be the remnants of a protoplanetary disk that failed to form into a planet, and not the wreckage of a destroyed planet. The terms and descriptions in myths are metaphorical and symbolic, reflecting ancient ideas about the world and their attempts to explain its origin, rather than literal accounts of space wars. Another intriguing mystery is the motivation of the gods to wage such wars. If the Anunnaki were powerful beings, then why did they come into conflict with each other so often? In traditional myths, gods fight for power, influence, territory, or personal grudges, which reflects human conflicts projected onto the divine level. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as something different, real conflicts between different alien factions, or even between different types of intelligent life. Perhaps it was wars for resources, such as gold on Earth, for control of territories in the solar system, or it was ideological conflicts between the Anunnaki that led to devastating consequences. Sitchin, for example, describes a long-running war of the gods that resulted in the nuclear destruction of Ur and other cities as a result of the struggle for control of Earth. This makes the Anunnaki not just gods, but powerful, but not always peaceful or moral beings who, like humans, fight wars for their own interests. The mystery also concerns the impact of these space wars on humanity. If the Anunnaki waged such wars in our solar system, how did this affect the Earth and the development of mankind? These conflicts may have caused global catastrophes, such as a flood, according to some versions, or they may have led to climate change or geological activity. Humanity may have witnessed these battles, which gave rise to the myths of heavenly battles. Or humanity was actively involved in these wars, acting as pawns or allies of one or another faction of the Anunnaks. The mystery of interstellar wars and planetary conflicts in the context of the Anunnaki is not just a question of what ancient myths tell us about the gods. It is an in-depth exploration of how we interpret the origins of the cosmos, how we try to explain catastanzas in history, and how our modern understanding of cosmic conflicts can be superimposed on ancient narratives. This reminds us that even the most fantastic myths can be the source of the most daring hypotheses, and that the line between mythology, science, and fiction remains blurred until definitive and irrefutable evidence is found. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the mystery of the flood in the ark, divine punishment or a planetary catastrophe and rescue operation, the story of the Great Flood, which destroyed almost all life on Earth, is one of the most universal and ancient myths present in the mythology of many cultures around the world. From Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian epics, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, to the biblical story of Noah's Ark. Despite the differences in detail, the main narrative is strikingly similar. Angry or disappointed gods decide to destroy humanity in a flood, but one or more righteous people are warned and instructed to build an ark in order to save themselves and preserve the patterns of life. Traditional academic scholarship explains these myths as reflecting real, albeit local, catastrophic floods that occurred in Mesopotamia and other regions, as well as allegorical or moralistic stories designed to explain divine retribution and the importance of righteousness. However, for proponents of the paleo-contact theory, in particular for Zachary Sitchin, these narratives take on a completely different literal meaning. They see them as encrypted or literally described evidence of a large-scale planetary catastrophe caused by natural or artificial causes, and of a grandiose rescue operation conducted by the Anunnaki, who, despite their differences, decided to save part of humanity and fauna. This raises a deep and still inexplicable mystery. Is the flood myth just a universal archetype inspired by real but limited floods, or does it contain hidden information about a global cataclysm that was foreseen or even provoked by alien gods? And what were the consequences? Their true motives and methods in this rescue operation. The central mystery is the global nature and cause of the flood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim tells how the gods, tired of the noise of humanity, decided to destroy it with a flood. However, the god Enki, who according to Sitchin was the geneticist and creator of man, warned Utnapishtim and gave him instructions for constructing the ark. The flood is described as a colossal storm that covered the entire earth. In the Bible, God decides to destroy humanity for its sins, but saves Noah and his family, as well as a couple of all kinds of animals, ordering the construction of the ark. Traditional science does not recognize the existence of a single global flood that would cover the entire earth in historical time, since geological and paleontological data do not support such a scenario. However, she admits that local catastrophic floods caused, for example, by the abrupt melting of glaciers at the end of the last ice age, breakthroughs of glacial lakes, for example, the Black Sea breaking through the Bosphorus, or powerful monsoons, could have been so devastating for ancient societies that they perceived them as global. Memories of such events could be passed down from generation to generation and overgrown with mythological details. However, Zecharia Sitchin offers a different explanation. He claims that the flood was caused by some cosmic or planetary phenomenon, possibly related to the approach of Nibiru or its gravitational influence on the Earth, which caused the displacement of polar ice or other cataclysms. For Sitchin, the wrath of the gods is not so much a moral judgment as a pragmatic decision to purge the Earth of unwanted humanity, or it was an inevitable consequence of a planetary event. He also suggests that the Anunnaki, with their advanced astronomical and geological knowledge, foresaw this catastrophe, and so we planned a rescue operation in advance. This raises the question, to what extent do the detailed descriptions in ancient texts correspond to the characteristics of a global flood and not a local flood? And if the Anunnaki could have foreseen such a catastrophe, why didn't they prevent it? Or why didn't they save more people? Another intriguing mystery is the Ark's technological capabilities and rescue methods. In myths, the Ark is described as a large vessel capable of accommodating many living creatures. Utnapishtim and Noah are given precise instructions on how to build it. Traditional science considers these instructions as elements of a mythological narrative that do not have a literal correspondence with real shipbuilding. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as evidence of advanced engineering knowledge passed on by the Anunnaki. They suggest that the Ark was not just a wooden ship, but may have possessed some technology that allowed it to withstand such a cataclysm. Or even more radically, the Ark could have been some kind of flying machine or spaceship used by the Anunnaki to evacuate selected people and life samples. For them, saving the seed of humanity and animals is proof that the Anunnaki saw humans as a valuable resource or experiment that they did not want to completely lose. The god Enki, who warned Utnapishtim, is interpreted as a humanist among the Anunnaki, who, against the will of others, Enlil, decided to save humanity. This begs the question, how realistic is it to expect ancient texts written thousands of years before the advent of modern technology to literally describe spaceships or complex engineering solutions? And why, if the Anunnaki possessed such capabilities, did they not save the entire human civilization, but only a small fragment of it? The mystery also concerns the consequences of the flood and the restart of civilization. After the flood, the world, according to myths, was devastated, and humanity had to start all over again. The gods eventually regret their decision and make a covenant, promising never again to destroy the world with a flood. For traditional science, this represents a reset of humanity after a catastrophic event in the establishment of a new order. However, proponents of paleocontact see this as a new stage in the Anunnaki experiment with humanity. After the flood, human lifespans are significantly shortened, and the Anunnaki may have changed their methods of interaction, moving to more indirect influence. They could help humanity restart civilization by passing on new knowledge and technologies, which explains the sudden rebirth and flourishing of Sumer after the flood. The mystery of the flood and the Ark in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of whether there was a global flood. It is an in-depth exploration of how myths reflect collective traumas and hopes, how they can be interpreted through the lens of modern scientific and technological concepts, and how we seek answers to questions about our survival in the face of global threats. This mystery continues to stimulate the imagination and inspire research, forcing us to rethink our understanding of ancient catastrophes and their potential impact on the fate of humanity. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the secret of ancestors in the tree of life, an evolutionary chain or a family tree of extraterrestrial origin. Various ancient mythologies, including Sumerian and biblical texts, often refer to first humans, progenitors or demigods, who lived in ancient times and had unique abilities or incredible lifespans. Sometimes these beings are associated with a certain tree of life or source of immortality, which was available in the Golden Age, but then became inaccessible to humanity. These narratives, which traditional academic science explains as mythological allegories, symbolizing the loss of primitive innocence, the desire for immortality or an idealized past, take on a completely different, literal, and even scientific meaning for proponents of the paleocontact theory. They see them as encrypted or literally described evidence of human genetic modification by the Anunnaki, as well as the existence of various generations of humanity or hybrids created during the experiments of these alien gods. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are these ancient tales of progenitors in the tree of life solely the product of human imagination, which seeks to make sense of origin and mortality? Or do they really contain hidden information about real genetic manipulations carried out by extraterrestrial beings? And how this can explain the jumps in human evolution and its unique cognitive abilities? The central mystery lies in the unusual characteristics of the first men in their connection to the gods. In Sumerian mythology, the first kings who preceded the flood lived for thousands of years, as discussed in the section on longevity, which is significantly longer than the lifespan of ordinary people after the flood. In the Bible, Adam and his descendants also lived a very long time before the flood. For example, Methuselah lived 969 years. These beings are often described as heroes, giants, or demigods, who had a direct connection to the gods. Traditional academic scholarship interprets these narratives as mythological symbols designed to emphasize the special status of these first people, their proximity to the divine world, and idealize the golden age before the onset of disasters. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see this as a direct indication of the genetic nature of these creatures. They claim that the first humans were hybrids, the result of crossing the Anunnaki with primitive hominids. This explains their unusual lifespan, their divine abilities, such as the ability to communicate with the gods, and their high intelligence. Sitchin suggests that the Anunnaki created man, Homo sapiens, by genetic engineering, using their DNA and that of Homo erectus to produce a lula, a primitive worker, and the progenitors who lived for thousands of years could have been more pure hybrids with a large percentage of Anunnaki DNA. The tree of life, or food of the gods, may be a metaphor for the genetic material or life-prolonging technologies that the Anunnaki may have used for themselves, and to a limited extent, for their first creations. This raises the question, to what extent do the detailed descriptions in ancient texts correspond to the characteristics of genetic manipulation or hybridization? And if these progenitors were genetically modified, then why is there no direct archaeological or paleontological evidence to support the presence of such hybrids or technological traces of genetic engineering? Another intriguing mystery is the gaps in human evolution and the sudden unfortunate appearance of Homo sapiens. Traditional anthropology and paleontology describe human evolution as a gradual process stretching over millions of years, with numerous intermediate forms. However, there is a so-called 200,000-year gap. Homo sapiens of an anatomically modern type appears on Earth around the same time. 200,000, 300,000, its origin is still the subject of scientific debate. Some scientists talk about the sudden emergence of complex cognitive abilities and language that do not have obvious predecessors in earlier hominids. Proponents of the paleocontact theory see this as the point of intervention of the Anunnaki. They claim that it is 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, the Anunnaki conducted their own genetic experiments, creating Homo sapiens as a labor force for gold mining. This explains the sudden appearance of modern man and his unique abilities, which could not have developed naturally in such a short period of time. They suggest that the Anunnaki implanted their DNA in the DNA of primitive hominids, which led to the emergence of intelligent man. This raises the question, how large are these gaps in human AI evolution? And can they be explained within the framework of standard evolutionary theories? For example, bottleneck, rapid environmental changes, migration? And if the Anunnaki interfered with human genetics, why didn't they leave any direct, irrefutable evidence of their laboratories, tools, or traces of genetic engineering in the ancient remains? The riddle also concerns the psychological and spiritual need for a creator or net ancestor god. The idea that humanity was created or modified by higher beings is deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness. For many people, it gives meaning to their existence, explains their uniqueness, and gives them hope for the future. In the context of the Anunnaki, this need is expressed in the theory of genetic parents, who may be watching us and may return. The ancestral mystery in the Tree of Life, in the Anunnaki context, is not just a question of how man came into being. It is a profound study of how myths shape our worldview, how they can be interpreted through the lens of modern scientific concepts, genetics, evolution, and how our own need for meaning and belonging affects our understanding of the world. On our perception of ancient history, this mystery continues to stimulate the imagination and inspire new research, forcing us to rethink our understanding of our own origins and the potential impact of extraterrestrial forces on our destiny. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors, the mystery of Atlantis and lost civilizations, mythical kingdoms or traces of extraterrestrial influence. Myths about lost continents and highly developed, vanished civilizations, such as Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, are firmly ingrained in the collective consciousness of humanity. These legends, passed down from generation to generation, describe utopian societies with advanced knowledge, technology, and spiritual wisdom, which for some reason were destroyed as a result of grandiose cataclysms. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, gave the most famous description of Atlantis as a powerful sea power that existed 9,000 years before Solon, which was eventually absorbed by the ocean. Traditional academic scholarship treats these narratives as purely mythological or philosophical allegories designed to illustrate political ideas, moral lessons, or ideas about an ideal society. Atlantis, in particular, is often interpreted as a fiction by Plato. However, for proponents of the theory of paleocontact and alternative history, these myths have a completely different, literal meaning. They see them as encrypted or literally described evidence of real, highly developed civilizations that may have been created or significantly developed under the influence of the Anunnaki, or even be their direct colonies. The disappearance of these civilizations, in their opinion, could be the result of both natural disasters and technological conflicts involving the Anunnaki. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are the myths of Atlantis and other lost worlds just a figment of human imagination? Or do they contain hidden information about real-life, highly developed societies that were linked to the extraterrestrial influence of the Anunnaki, and how their demise could be part of a broader cosmic drama? The central mystery lies in the inexplicable advancement of extinct civilizations. Plato describes Atlantis as an island kingdom with incredibly complex architecture, advanced engineering, such as canals, harbors, a hierarchical society, and, most importantly, a population with a high level of spiritual and intellectual development. Traditional science explains such descriptions as idealization and hyperbole characteristic of philosophical texts, as well as a projection of Plato's own ideas about the ideal state on a fictional past. The search for Atlantis in the real world, for example, Santorini, Tyre, Crete, the Bahamas, continues. But none of the sites found correspond to the complete description of Plato or have sufficient archaeological evidence of a technological level significantly superior to ancient civilizations. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory see this as a direct indication of extraterrestrial influence. They suggest that Atlantis and similar civilizations were colonies or outposts of the Anunnaki, or civilizations to which the Anunnaki passed on their technology and knowledge. This explains their inexplicable advancement in areas that seem to go beyond the capabilities of ancient humanity. The use of unknown sources of energy, construction of giant structures, weather management, etc. Perhaps the Anunnaki created these civilizations as laboratories for their experiments, or as bases for extracting resources, or as transit points on their routes. This begs the question, how detailed are these advanced technologies in ancient myths to be interpreted as more than general indications of wealth and power? And if the Anunnaki did create or maintain such civilizations, why did they allow them to perish? And why is there no direct, irrefutable archaeological evidence of their intervention, such as remnants of alien technology? Another intriguing mystery is the causes of the demise of these utopian civilizations. Plato describes the destruction of Atlantis as the result of divine retribution for its moral corruption and arrogance, which led to earthquakes and floods that engulfed the island in one day and one night. Traditional science interprets this as a moralistic parable designed to emphasize the dangers of pride and non-compliance with divine laws. In reality, the death of ancient civilizations is most often attributed to a combination of natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, climate change, internal conflicts, wars, and epidemics. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis offer more dramatic scenarios. They suggest that the demise of Atlantis and other similar civilizations may have been the result of space wars between various Anunnaki factions or failed technological experiments on the part of the Atlanteans themselves, if they used Anunnaki technology, that got out of control. Perhaps the catastrophe was instigated by the Anunnaki as a punishment for disobedience or as a way to erase traces of their presence, or the Anunnaki simply abandoned Earth, leaving humanity to fend for itself and unable to maintain advanced technology. This raises the question, how convincing is the evidence for the sudden and technological demise of these civilizations? And can they be distinguished from natural disasters? And if the Anunnaki were so powerful that they could create and destroy civilizations, why are their footprints so elusive? The mystery also concerns the potential connection between the survivors of these civilizations and the subsequent development of humanity. Some proponents of the Atlantis theory suggest that after the demise of their empires, the surviving Atlanteans or their descendants may have migrated to other parts of the world, carrying with them scraps of ancient knowledge and technology. This, they believe, explains the sudden emergence of complex civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Central America, and other regions, as well as the presence of similar myths and symbols in distant cultures. Thus, the myth of Atlantis becomes not just a story about paradise lost, but a key to understanding the global spread of civilization and the potential influence of primitive teachers. The mystery of Atlantis and lost civilizations in the context of the Anunnaki is not just a question of whether the legendary Atlantis existed. It is a deep exploration of how the myths of Atlantis and the lost civilizations of the Anunnaki existed. They reflect our collective aspirations for excellence and our fears of doom, as they can be interpreted through the lens of a search for extraterrestrial influence, and how our own quest to explain the inexplicable shapes our perception of antiquity. This mystery continues to stimulate the imagination and inspire new research, forcing us to rethink our understanding of ancient cultures and the potential connection between humanity and the mysterious gods from heaven. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of humanity's destiny and divine plan. Free will or a programmed future? One of the most profound and philosophical aspects of the Anunnaki myths, especially in the context of paleocontact theory, concerns the purpose of humanity and its role in the one divine plan, or, as proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis suggest, in the plan of the Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki really created or modified humanity, then the inevitable question arises: what was their ultimate goal? Were we just a labor force for resource extraction, as some claim, or were we part of a larger experiment aimed at developing a new species or colonizing a planet? And if our origin is connected with external interference, then how free is our will, and can we independently shape our future, or is it already programmed by our creators? Traditional academic science considers the question of the destiny of humanity as an exclusively philosophical or religious category that is not related to the empirical sciences. For her, humanity is a product of natural evolution, which forms its own destiny. However, for proponents of the paleocontact theory, these questions take on a literal and even disturbing meaning. They assume that the Anunnaki may have left us tasks or programs to complete, or that our future is already determined by their plans. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Is our destiny solely the result of our free will and collective decisions, Or is it part of a divine plan or program laid down by the alien Anunnaki? And how can awareness of such potential influences change our self-perception and our future? The central puzzle is the motivation of the Anunnaki to create man. In Sumerian mythology, man was created to free the gods from labor, especially from resource extraction. This is a very pragmatic and even utilitarian goal. The Anunnaki complain about the drudgery of working in the mines, if interpreted as miners, and decide to create a Lulu, a worker who will perform this function. Traditional science sees this motif as a reflection of the social structure of ancient societies, where there were slaves or lower strata of the population who performed heavy labor, and the gods, as a rule, lived in luxury and demanded offerings. This myth explains social hierarchy and the need for labor to survive. However, Zecharia Sitchin and his followers see this as a literal description of genetic engineering and workforce creation. For them, man was a bio-robot created for specific purposes, gold mining. This explains why the Anunnaki were so interested in creating it, and why they gave it enough intelligence to understand instructions, but perhaps not too much to prevent it from rebelling. However, some proponents of paleocontact suggest more complex motives. Perhaps the Anunnaki saw in humanity the potential for development, or they were the sowers of life that spread intelligent beings throughout the galaxy. Perhaps they created us as part of their own evolutionary process, or as a way to understand themselves. This begs the question, if we were created for a specific purpose, what is that purpose today when the need for gold mining may have disappeared? And can we reprogram ourselves or change our purpose? Another intriguing mystery is the existence of moral or ethical prescriptions passed down by the gods. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, as in the Bible, the gods give people laws, rules of conduct, and moral principles. These laws regulate social life, relationships between people, and the relationship between people and gods. Traditional science sees Seth as the development of ethical and moral systems within human society, which were then attributed to a divine origin to give them authority and legitimacy. However, proponents of the extraterrestrial hypothesis see this as an instruction or code of conduct passed down by the Anunnaki. They suggest that these laws were not just moral guidelines, but rules necessary to maintain order and stability in the colony of the Anunnaki. Perhaps they were designed to optimize the work of humanity and prevent chaos that could interfere with their own plans. Thus, morality and ethics become not a purely human invention, but part of the program laid down from the outside. This begs the question, if morality has been programmed, how free is our conscience? And can we develop our own ethical principles independently of divine instructions? The mystery also concerns the future of humanity and the return of the Anunnaki. If our destiny was determined by the Anunnaki, what will happen when they return? Will they be happy with our development? Or will they reprogram us or even destroy us and start over? And some proponents of the paleocontact theory believe that humanity is moving towards a kind of assemblage point or contact when it meets its creators again. This causes both hope for new knowledge and technologies and fear for the loss of freedom and possible slavery. This idea penetrates deeply into popular culture, giving rise to many science fiction scenarios. The mystery of humanity's purpose and divine plan in the Anunnaki context is not just a question of what ancient myths tell us about the meaning of life. It is a profound study of how we make sense of our place in the universe, how we respond to the possibility of external interference in our development, and how our own free will and desire for self-determination is confronted with the idea of a programmed future. This mystery continues to stimulate the imagination and inspire new research, forcing us to rethink our understanding of our own origins and the potential consequences of meeting those who may have created us. Anunnaki, ancient gods or alien visitors. The mystery of archaeological gaps and future discoveries. Missing links or hidden evidence. At the heart of all debates about the Anunnaki, whether as mythological gods or as alien visitors, is a fundamental problem: archaeological evidence. Although Sumerian texts, cylinder seals, and other artifacts exist, their interpretation remains a stumbling block between academic science and proponents of paleocontact theory. Academic archaeology and history strives for verifiable, material evidence that can be excavated, dated, and analyzed using scientific methods. The lack of such direct evidence in the form of alien ships, technological devices, or genetic laboratories of the Anunnaki is the main argument against their extraterrestrial origin. However, proponents of alternative theories point to archaeological gaps, some missing links in the development of ancient civilizations, as well as the possibility that much evidence is hidden, lost, or not yet found. This raises a deep and still unexplained mystery. Are the existing archaeological gaps simply a consequence of the incompleteness of our knowledge, limited methods, and the natural destruction of artifacts by time, as academic science claims? Or are they the result of a deliberate concealment of evidence, deliberate removal, or more likely, their occurrence in hard-to-reach places that are not easily accessible? What remains to be discovered, and how can future archaeological discoveries or new methods of analysis resolve this eternal dilemma? The central puzzle is the interpretation of gaps in the archaeological record. Academic archaeology recognizes that our knowledge of ancient civilizations is far from complete. Archaeological excavations cover only a small part of the known ancient settlements, and most of the artifacts are still hidden underground. Many materials, wood, solid wood, organic matter, simply do not survive for thousands of years. In addition, the interpretation of ancient artifacts always depends on the context and current scientific knowledge. What appears to be a gap today can be explained tomorrow by a new discovery. For example, the sudden appearance of writing in Sumer, which Sitchin explains as the intervention of the Anunnaki, is attributed by academics to the gradual development of the system of accounting and marking that preceded cuneiform, and new findings continue to clarify this process. However, proponents of the paleocontact theory see in these gaps not just a lack of information, but evidence of lost or hidden technologies and knowledge. They suggest that the Anunnaki may have removed their technology from Earth before leaving, or they may have been destroyed in space wars or natural disasters. There is also speculation that some evidence may be deliberately hidden by elites or secret societies who are interested in keeping the truth about alien interference secret. This raises the question, how objective are the archaeological gaps, and can they be explained in terms of natural processes, collapses, and limited excavations? And if the evidence is hidden, why is it so difficult to find it, despite modern technologies and search methods? Another intriguing mystery is the potential for future discoveries and new research methods. Archaeology is a constantly evolving science. New technologies such as ground-penetrating radars, satellite sensing, and LiDAR, light detection and ranging, make it possible to detect structures hidden under the ground or vegetation without the need for large-scale surveys. The development of dating methods, for example, new methods of radiocarbon dating, optically stimulated luminescence, allows us to specify the age of artifacts and events. Genetic analysis of ancient remains, paleogenetics, opens up new possibilities for studying human evolution and migrations of peoples, which may shed light on the alleged genetic manipulation. Theoretically, if the Anunnaki did conduct genetic experiments, then traces of their DNA or modifications could be found in ancient human remains. If they used advanced technologies, then some unique mineral or chemical traces could remain in the places of their intended stay, which could be detected using modern analytical methods. This gives hope to the supporters of paleocontact that sooner or later the missing links will be found. Academic science, in turn, welcomes these new methods as tools for better understanding the past, but encourages caution in interpreting the data and avoiding jumping to conclusions. The lack of direct evidence of extraterrestrial interference is still a fact. The conundrum also concerns the boundaries of scientific knowledge and paradigmatic shifts. Throughout the history of science, there have been paradigm shifts when new discoveries or theories radically change our understanding of the world. Some proponents of paleocontact believe that recognizing the extraterrestrial origin of the Anunnaki will be such a shift that will change our understanding of human history. They argue that the scientific community is too conservative and resists new ideas that challenge established theories. However, academic science insists that such a shift requires irrefutable, repeatable, and verifiable evidence, not interpretations of myths or coincidences. Until such evidence is presented, paleocontact theories remain the realm of hypothesis and speculation, however intriguing. The mystery of archaeological gaps and future discoveries in the Anunnaki contextus, not just a question of what lies underground, it is a deep exploration of how we build knowledge about the past, how we overcome the limitations of our methods, and how we respond to the inexplicable. This reminds us that history is not a synoptic body of facts, but a constantly evolving field of research that is always ready for new discoveries that can shed light on the darkest corners of our past. Perhaps the future will bring us definitive answers to the Anunnaki riddle, or perhaps the Ono will only deepen it, revealing new layers of mysteries that are waiting to be solved. The mystery of the Anunnaki, whether they are ancient gods from Sumerian myths or alien visitors from paleocontact theories, continues to be one of the most fascinating and hotly debated topics in the modern world. It is firmly established at the intersection of history, archaeology, mythology, and science fiction hypotheses, fueling endless debate and inspiring both scientists and enthusiasts to find new answers. In every aspect, from their origin and alleged interference in human creation to their role in the development of civilizations and possible wars, we see a deep gap between the academic approach and alternative interpretations. Academic scholarship tirelessly emphasizes the importance of empirical evidence, rigorous linguistic analysis, and contextual interpretation of ancient texts and artifacts. It explains the phenomenon of the Sumerian miracle as a result of internal factors: human ingenuity, adaptation to the environment, gradual accumulation of knowledge, and the development of social structures. Myths about the Anunnaki are seen as a reflection of religious beliefs, the desire to understand natural phenomena and build a social hierarchy, and not as literal chronicles of extraterrestrial intervention. The lack of direct, irrefutable archaeological evidence of alien technology or genetic manipulation remains a cornerstone of her argument. In contrast, paleocontact theories, largely popularized by Zachary Sitchin, offer a bold alternative view. They interpret ancient myths and unexplained artifacts as evidence of the literal presence of technologically advanced alien beings. The Anunnaki. These beings, who came from the hypothetical planet Nibiru, allegedly created humanity by genetic engineering to extract gold, taught it agriculture and civilizational skills, and then perhaps left the Earth, leaving behind only mysterious traces and predictions about their return. For proponents of these theories, gaps in the archaeological record and unexplained leaps in human development are not signs of a lack of knowledge, but rather evidence of hidden or lost extraterrestrial intervention. This dichotomy raises fundamental questions that go beyond mere historical or scientific research. It concerns our psychological need for an explanation of origin, our desire to find meaning in the vast universe, and our willingness to accept sensational but untested hypotheses when traditional explanations seem insufficient. The Anunnaki myths, in their modern interpretation, reflect our deep-rooted curiosity about the unknown, our fear of the unknown, and our eternal desire for the universe to be more than just random. Ultimately, the Anunnaki mystery remains open. So far, there is no convincing, verifiable scientific evidence that can definitively confirm or deny their extraterrestrial origin. Future archaeological discoveries, the development of new analytical techniques, and ongoing space exploration and the search for extraterrestrial life may one day shed light on these ancient mysteries. Until then, the Anunnaki will continue to live in our collective imaginations, as powerful gods from the distant past, as mysterious alien architects of our civilization. And this unquenchable urge to unravel, no matter which interpretation we choose, is the deepest and perhaps most important trait of the human spirit.